When I was 2 years old, when I was dedicated to the cause of Lucifer, I was at that point a seventh generation witch.
I was laying there, practically naked, and I had her hold me as if I was a baby. I couldn't talk. I couldn't open my eyes. I believe my eyes were rolled up back in my head.
There was evidence of human sacrifice on this site. One of my first questions I asked the guy, is there evidence of human sacrifice? And I looked around there and said, yes. We found the man with his fingers like who was a Richard Zachary.
And it started to come down the stairs and there were disgusting smells. And at that point, just basically said, do you know what they did to us? And that's when I fled that home.
But no, they would touch me. They would put pictures in my head if they wanted to communicate with me. Human sacrifice. Human sacrifice. Human sacrifice. Human sacrifice. Implants are real, okay? You know, we've got them on X-ray, we've got them on CAT scan, we've got them on the Gauss meter, which measures magnetic field 7.5. We've got them on an ultrasound machine. It's right there. It's hard, physical evidence, not delusionary.
Hey guys, welcome back to Conspirinormal. It's your host Adam Sane,
And producer Rob.
and this is the 100th and a half episode. This is we just posted not too long ago a show that was our roundtable for everyone inside the studio, and this show is everyone that is on the Skype calls that we did. Like we said before, we have people that live all across the country, and we just wanted to get some of our former guests on that we really enjoyed, and we're going to have them on here on this recording that we actually recorded before the roundtable portion. So it's going to be like traveling back in time. And thank you guys for listening. And we're going to start off with a very special guest who's been on for 4 times, and that is Mr. Adam Gorightly. And we'll be back on the flip side. All right, guys, welcome to the Skype call edition of the Conspirinormal 100th episode Extravaganza.
Woohoo.
And what we're doing is we're going to have various guests that have been on the show, usually about 3 or more times, although I do have a couple of exceptions to the rule. And we're actually recording this on a separate night because the guest that we have on could not be here on Saturday, but I really wanted to get him on, one of our favorite guests from real early on. And that is Mr. Adam Gorightly. Welcome back to Conspirinormal, Adam.
Thanks for having me on, Adam.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always fun. I just wanted to kind of go over what shows I've had you on in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And
good, you can refresh my memory. I know it's been, I know at least 2 or 3 times.
The first time we had you on was, I think, like October 2012. And that was actually episode 12. And we talked a lot about, like, that was mostly about your book, Happy Trails to High Weirdness. God,
okay, yeah, that's about the time it came out, 2012.
Yeah. It was, we talked about Jeff Turner. We talked about, we hit on the Thornley stuff. And we also talked a little bit about, like, Dr. Lilly from the original Altered States. We talked about that, and there's so much that that was so much involved there that I also read. I think I'd read the same time that I read the High Weirdness book was also the same time I read The Beast of Adam Gorightly.
Okay,
and so we talked a little bit about some of that stuff as well. I had you back on for episode 17. I think that was the next month. I'm pretty sure that was November of that year. And we talked a lot about Montauk Project, and we talked about Charles Manson stuff, is where we kind of got a lot of that covered. Then in, I believe it was like July 2013, I had you back on for episode 33, of course. And that was at the point of time that we were on that everybody was mentioning the whole 33rd parallel. which I
We were
guess
probably talking about Downer.
Yeah, we were talking about Downard. That was the one. That was the person that we were talking about. It's kind of a short show, but kind of short and sweet. And the last time I had you on actually was on my birthday in 2014. That was episode 57, and we talked about the Discordian as a book.
Okay.
At that time,
Yeah.
the Historia Discordia.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of a cool little interview about Kerry Thornley and Greg Hill and Robert Anton Wilson and all kinds of good stuff there. So that's the kind of your history on Conspirinormal.
Okay.
And of course, I first heard you, I believe, I was telling Rob before we got started that I'd heard you on a show called Out There Radio, which these guys,
that goes way back.
Yeah, that was like 2006, I think. They were these guys that are actually not too far from us in Athens, Georgia. And that's actually they're actually also the guys that I first heard about the Georgia Guidestones from. Which
That's Raymond Wiley.
Yeah, yeah.
And whoever that character was, he was.
Yeah, I can't remember now. It's been a long time. But they were on the Athens radio station, and I just looking for stuff to listen to, and I found out about you and listened to your old podcast that you used to do. And kind of getting into
those
all
were pretty wild.
kind of getting into the whole conspiracy weirdness.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to, bring you on and just kind of talk about some weird shit, As life to do.
I suppose I'm the man, huh?
You are the man. You are the crackpot historian, sir. Absolutely. I really wanted to kind of start out and just kind of find out what you're working on now. What's you're kind of after the Historia Discordia book. I really hadn't heard from you for a while, so I just kind of wanted to get an idea of what it is that you're working on now.
Well, a few things. A couple of UFO-related books, and one of those is like a collection of all my UFO writings over the years, including some new stuff I've been working on. There's one piece I've been working on for, oh my God, it's been years, just because it's kind of set it to the side a few times and working on other book projects. And it's a long piece about Dulce, the whole Dulce base mythos, called Deconstructing Dulce. I think I started this around 2008. I met a couple of curious characters that were there at the very beginning of the Dulce story. And so that's kind of where it started, and I'm trying to wind it up now after kind of working on and off on this thing for since in 2008 to have it ready for this book, which I hope to complete sometime soon. I was hoping by the end of this year, but that's not going to happen. So maybe sometime next year I'll have it finished and maybe published. But we'll see. I'm not in a hurry. I want to do it right. So I have that. Then there's a second UFO book. I'm getting UFOs out of my system, I guess. I don't want to talk too much, but it's a book on the old school UFO contactees.
Oh, nice.
And I have a partner I'm collaborating on this book, but it's a little early to talk too much about that. But it's going to be a good one too, I think. So a couple of UFO books, then also another Discordian related title I'm going to start digging into. In past shows we talked the whole story how I came upon the Discordian archives that were passed to me and all the book projects that came out of those. And there's a website, Historia Discordia, where I've posted a lot of the materials. And within the archives are a bunch of letters, from Kerry Thornley and Greg Hill, Robert Anton Wilson, Robert Shea, Wilson's co-author with Illuminatus, and a few other people. And, I started taking a look at those at one point. Will these make a book? And I think they will make an entertaining book because there's kind of a theme that runs through there, really the kind of narrative about where all their heads were at in the late 60s and the 70s during that whole Illuminatus period when that was being written and published.
Yeah,
So yeah, there's that book, a book of letters, and that's the main three things I'm working on now.
I guess that would be like a companion piece to the Historia Discordia.
Sure. Yeah, most definitely.
What kind of things are in those letters? Like, what's the kind of like their thought processes?
Oh, well, shoot. And it's going to take some thought, which ones to include, what not to include, because, how letters are. Some are filled with a lot of minutia. It's not necessarily relevant. And then there's some total gems, where a 3-page letter where everything is valuable and would make sense to the reader. But
yeah, we have a dog in here.
What did I say that activated him?
He's an MK Ultra dog.
Okay.
Did
he know the son of Sam?
He might. He might.
Is he Sam?
He might be that dog. He might be the dog that triggered it.
Right.
He's not a Rottweiler though, so I'm sure he's all good.
I don't know that date.
But yeah, getting back to those letters, they go back. Let's see. Some of them go back as far as like 61 or 62.
Wow.
And then there's the early letters where Hill and Thornley were developing the Principia Discordia and sharing ideas. Whole bunch of those letters, some of the early Discordian writings. And then it kind of evolves into the 60s counterculture, a lot of the stuff that was going on. Then also all those guys during the period in the late 60s were producing their own little newsletters that a lot of people don't know about. There's a lot of those. Maybe those can be woven into, the narrative. Then as we progress into the 70s, or through the 60s with the Garrison investigation, and as you get to the mid 70s, Thornley has kind of pretty much gone off the deep end, and there's some of those letters between he and Robert Anton Wilson and his other friends where, like, he's accusing Robert Anton Wilson of plotting against him, and so you see the whole kind of arc of the story, and so I think, I'll have to. It'll be something where I'll have to put commentary in here and there to just explain certain things.
Do you think that Thornley was messing with Jim Garrison? Because it's funny, like I remember reading.
Yeah, he was.
I remember reading about. I finally broke down and read On the Trail of the Assassins after owning it for probably like 20 years.
Oh yeah,
and there it's just so funny to see Carrie Thornley just like mentioned in that book. It's interesting.
Well, it's all pretty much inaccurate.
Yeah.
And I've covered some of that on my Historia Discordia page. Now and then I'll look into different things. Like there's the great, thing that Garrison started that he's claiming Thornley was a CIA agent. And I wrote a rather long post about that a few months ago, called Was Carrie Thornley CIA, where I pretty much, I think, debunk that. There was a Garrison never really showed any proof, but a few years, like in 2006, there was Joan Mellon's book on the Garrison investigation. I think, what's the title? The title escapes me at the moment, but yeah, it was 2006, and at the very beginning of the book, it says that she names Carrie Thornley as being involved with the conspirators, supposed conspirators out of New Orleans, and that he was a CIA agent, and she had a CIA document to prove it. Later in the book, she calls it a defense or a DOD document. And so when I read that in 2006, I went, whoa, maybe there is something to all this, if she actually has documentation that proves it.
Right.
So I emailed her back then, and I was like, No, I emailed her a few years later when I started writing that Caught in the Crossfire book, maybe 2009, and inquired about the documentation she was referring to. And she responded, and she said she'd get me a copy of it. But she, at the time, she said she was had just gone in for some type of medical procedure or something, so she was convalescing, but she'd get it to me later. And so I didn't hear back. I emailed her like half a dozen times with no response. So I figured she might have looked into me a little bit more in my first Thornley book, how I was somewhat negative of Garrison. And so anyway, over the years, man, I've been looking for that document and really only uncovered it after I wrote the Caught in the Crossfire book. Somebody pointed me towards I think it's the Baylor University Library in Texas, where I found this document she was talking about, and you can see it on the website. I go through it pretty painstakingly, and there's no mention of the CIA in it. She's just connecting dots that aren't there.
Reading between the lines.
Totally.
As she thinks, yeah.
And so, where was I going? With the Garrison book, I'll do some more posts I've been planning to on Historia Discordia, going through Trail of Assassin, picking out different stuff. But boy, he's just, I mean, it's...
The Kennedy assassination is like it becomes such a quagmire because it's just like, who did what then, and you know, it's kind of gets crazy after a while.
Garrison's, considered the gospel to a lot of people, and he sort of was to me too back in the day, because I turned on to conspiracy research with like Mae Russell, if you know who she is.
Yeah.
Way back when, like in the 80s, she had a radio show, and she was, like the godmother of conspiracy research, and she was heavily into JFK assassination. That's how she really started, by going through the Warren Commission report way back when. And so she did some good research, but, as the years progressed, man, she was connecting everybody to everything, it seemed like. But she always spoke so highly of Garrison, I thought, okay, this guy's the district attorney of New Orleans, must be legit, and he put all these theories together, which later evolved into the the film JFK by Oliver Stone. So over time I became interested in Thornley and looked deeper into his story, because he was prosecuted by Garrison, and really going through all these books and everything over the years, I think Garrison might have been on the right track with a few things, but he got most of the stuff all wrong. He was just seeing things that he wanted to see.
Right. And I think, too, with Garrison, I think he was probably on the right track. Where people, I think, have a problem with him was that I think he was a product of his environment. I mean, he was a DA, but he was also a DA in New Orleans, which is a pretty, at that time, and still is kind of notoriously corrupt place. So I think he kind of, played the game as he saw it there, but his tactics probably weren't the best, and he probably did leave himself open to attacks. That's probably why no one ever tried to kill the guy. They just would try to discredit him, because he was probably easy. People
who would challenge him, like Thornley, he got to put a perjury charge on him, because he didn't believe what Thornley was saying, but he didn't really have any proof to. He never brought Thornley to trial, and it's the same thing. You look at a lot of these guys. When you really get down deep into the weeds, even somebody like David Ferry, who most people are convinced was involved. I'm not so sure these days at getting deeper into it. What Garrison came across was intelligence operations going on there in New Orleans. There definitely were some spooks that were connected to the CIA and the anti-Castro movement, but I think Garrison bringing the JFK assassination into that, he didn't really have much of a case there if you really look into it.
Well, I mean, I think with Oswald, as far as New Orleans, Garrison always kind of typified that as his whole case was that they were sheep dipping Oswald as the assassin. And I've kind of gone back and looked at that stuff I've read from you and other researchers. And I've kind of gone back and looked at that and thought, that's probably not what they were doing. Oswald probably was working with them, but it was probably a totally independent thing that had nothing to do with the assassination. That probably came a few months later, and they probably used that operation, whatever he was doing in New Orleans to infiltrate leftist groups or whatever. They probably used that against him later on after he was dead. But it probably actually had nothing to do with the assassination itself.
Now, yeah, that's one thing that Garrison claimed that Oswald was manipulated by that group and was probably a spy of some sort. And so, there was something there. Certainly, in my research, it definitely looks like, going back to his time in the Marines, that he was being groomed to be a spy, and that's
he was definitely in some kind of intelligence agency for sure. I mean, there's no doubt of that in my mind.
Yeah, and then he defects to Soviet Union, and short time later he's back in the States and
is able to come back with his Soviet wife,
Yeah, he's welcome back. I think the government even gave him a loan. So definitely something going on there with Oswald.
Wasn't E. Howard Hunt? Wasn't he? I've heard recently that Hunt was actually in charge of. He was actually at that Itsugi Air Force Base. I don't think at the same time Oswald and Thornley were there. But he was actually in charge of that program to send young men as fake defectors to the Soviet Union.
Now, I know I've talked about that to you, but the information I had was not quite that in-depth. All I knew was that, roughly during the same period that Thornley and Oswald were at Atsugi, that E. Howard Hunt was there as well, and that at Atsugi they were carrying out a lot of the LSD testing, the MK Ultra type stuff, and Thornley later suspected that he'd been subject to, the MK Ultra program, and he thought Oswald had as well. So it was curious that E. Howard Hunt was there at Atsugi during that period, because it was one of the major outposts for the CIA there in Japan, in Asia. That's where they launched the U-2 flights out of. Right. But it sounds like you've come across more information that I'm not aware of.
I think I got this from Wikipedia or somewhere or somebody had said that or somewhere that I read it. Maybe E. Howard Hunt's son, who I'd love to get on the show, St. John. He's been out there revealing a lot about what his dad had been doing, and Hunt is probably an interesting guy, to say the least. I mean,
well, and there was his deathbed confession that his son videotaped. I guess you can still find that stuff.
Yeah, it's on YouTube
on the web, but. That might have been misdirection there. He's claiming different players in the assassination that hadn't, some of them really hadn't been mentioned before, like Cord Meyer.
Yeah.
CIA, he said Cord Meyer was in charge of the whole operation. And Cord Meyer was, of course, you probably know that story, husband of Mary Pinchot Meyer, who was a lover of JFK. Who Timothy Leary claimed he gave LSD to because she wanted to turn on certain world leaders
Oh,
and
that was
illuminate.
the same woman. Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So there's that connection. But yeah, going back to E. Howard Hunt, Thornley, we've been over this ground before, but Thornley, suspected that he met E. Howard Hunt in New Orleans in the early 60s when he was there, during that time period when Oswald was also there, but it was a Hunt in disguise going by the name of Gary Kirsten.
Yeah.
AKA brother-in-law, and Thornley didn't realize it was Hunt or someone he suspected was Hunt until the 70s when he came across, the information about the Watergate burglars, one of whom was Hunt. And that's when a lot of those memories started. Of course, it might have been paranoid delusion, confabulation, who knows, but, there's... it looks, if you look at Gary Thornley's life, he's kind of like Oswald, too. He had all these strange coincidences surrounding him, and he later goes off his rocker, Was he delusional to begin with, or did mind control, or, the persecution he got from Garrison all push him off the deep end?
Do you know... are you familiar with Judith Very Baker?
Yep.
What do you think of her story that she was Oswald's lover? Do you think that she's truthful?
I don't buy her story, whether she's delusional or untruthful or who knows. But I've looked into her quite a bit. And I've written a bit about her once again on this Storia Discordia's site, because she was, and basically I've gone through a lot of the claims about Thornley, in Caught in the Crossfire, but also other stuff on the Storia Discordia site. And she was, in her book, she claims she saw Thornley with Oswald and whatever. The dates don't really jibe with when Thornley was there. Is
Gotcha.
One problem with that. And then there's the issue. She claimed that she saw Thornley with Marina Oswald were going to the Oswald house. That was another thing that Garrison started, and I posted about that as well, and so she had her facts all wrong about that. Yeah, I think she's either making shit up or is delusional. If you had her on the show?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
I've thought about reaching out and trying to, because it's an interesting story, because some of it seems plausible to me, but that's why I wanted to get your thoughts on it, because
the problem is, and she has a lot of supporters.
Yeah, she does,
and an equal number of critics, and she's never really provided any real evidence to support it, other than she said that she knew him and Oswald, and they worked at the same place for a period of time, and basically
the coffee company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she has a pay stub. She posts, if you look at her book, there's all these things she includes in the book, like a pay stub for the Riley Coffee Company, but it's not really evidence that she had an intimate relationship with Oswald. She might have known him, however, briefly, but a lot of people have looked closely at her claims and presented evidence where she is perhaps deceitful, but at the very best, she just hasn't really shown anything in my mind that confirms any of her story.
Right. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Dulce-based stuff, specifically, and I'm sure you've had to have covered this in your writing. Phil Schneider.
Yeah, I was just mentioning in the intro there. I've been working on that Dulce piece for my forthcoming UFO book, which you may see next year. Who knows?
Awesome.
Fire away.
Well, what do you think about Phil Schneider? I
Well,
mean, I remember seeing. Of course, I found out about him after he died, but apparently he died under really mysterious circumstances. And I sometimes with some of these guys, and this can kind of go into the Bond talk and the Philadelphia experiment stuff too, I wonder how much someone like Phil Schneider might have been a mind control experiment himself.
There was some fishy stuff around his death, but we don't know for sure that he was killed as part of the conspiracy. But if you look at the Phil Schneider story, you got to go back way before he showed up. He showed up like in the mid-'90s,
right?
Telling his tale that he'd been at Dulce and had been part of that firefight. As the story goes. Let's back up before we get to the firefight. The Dulce story really started with Paul Benowitz back in the 80s, early 80s. You familiar with Benowitz?
Yeah, I'm more familiar with him because of a documentary called Mirage Men.
Mirage Men, yeah, right. Yeah. They talked to the evil Agent Doty in that.
They also talked to Walter Bosley.
Mm-hmm. Greg Bishop is in that. Greg is a friend, and he's written a great book called Project Beta, all about that whole Benowitz episode.
Yeah, when I watched that, I was like, "Where's Go Rightly?"
I wasn't as deep into it at that.
Bosley wasn't too happy with that documentary, by the way.
He was less happy with the book. I think the documentary was okay. He didn't like some of the material in the book. You can ask him when you talk to him.
Yeah.
But so let's go back with Benowitz, and this was like 1980 or so. Lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Has a company called Thunder Scientific. He created kind of high-tech devices for the government and the Air Force, humidity measuring stuff for aircraft. And so he had this business he'd started right there by Kirtland Air Force Base, like right on a stone's throw from Kirtland. And so he started seeing weird shit and filming it, and also picking up electromagnetic signals, and he started recording all this stuff. And appears it was some, secret aircraft going on. He got pretty deep into the cattle mutilation scene that was going on then in New Mexico and UFOs, and really began to believe over time that there was an ET invasion. Now, the stuff he had filmed and recorded was indeed sensitive stuff that the Air Force Intelligence and NSA was concerned about. How was he getting this, recording these signals and figuring out what was going on there with the aircraft? And he had all this material, and they were kind of nervous about that guy, because if he could do it, the Russians or whoever foreign nationals were a threat could might get some of this same information from who knows, he could, Benowitz could sell it, or they could figure out what he was doing to basically record these electromagnetic signals. Were basically codes that were being sent out that were related to the secret aircraft projects. Okay, so
were these drones? Because in that documentary they make the point that they were probably flying drones, and they just had them secret at that point.
That might have been one of them. There's a lot of theories. There was testing some laser equipment, and they were seeing circular discs, flying saucers. It could have been drones, but then stealth bomber kind of comes up in the story as well. Some of the descriptions, and then some of the descriptions of some of the aircraft don't match any of it. So if you get into this and talk to different people, there's a lot of different theories. So we don't even go there. Let's concentrate on Dulce. So He was so Benowitz became, he was the UFO guy, and Gabe Valdez, you familiar with that name? He was the New Mexico trooper who was involved in the cattle mutilations, and he knew Benowitz. There had been a cattle mutilation conference in like '79 in Albuquerque where they met, became friends. Benowitz went out on patrol. Valdez would go out at night chasing the cattle mutilators, and you're often, these strange aircraft or sometimes black helicopters. A lot of weirdness going on during that period. So anyway, at one point, this was like 1980, Valdez got a call from the Cimarron office in New Mexico, sheriffs there. Valdez was out in Dulce area, and they said they had this hysterical lady came in saying that she'd been abducted, her and her son, by spacemen, and that cattle had been sucked up into the spaceship in a tractor beam. This was 1980 before a lot of these claims started. So the Cimarron office called Valdez because he was the one who dealt with all the weird stuff, and Valdez called Paul Benowitz to see if he could help. Benowitz was part of that flying saucer, not flying saucer group, UFO group, APRO, Aerial Phenomena, whatever. They were a big UFO group back in the day, like MUFON. Yeah. And because Valdez needed help, what to do with this young lady. She's out of her mind with this thing. She's hysterical. So this gets pretty complicated, or convoluted. But so Benowitz called Leo Sprinkle, who was at like Wyoming University, and he'd done regressions for 10 years. And so he had some expertise. So they brought this lady to Benowitz's house and started regression sessions. And she revealed that they'd been abducted, and cow got sucked up in a tractor beam, and they were doing awful things, and that she later was transported to a secret underground base. And Benowitz in time began to believe that the base was located in Dulce, in the Archuleta Mesa area, which is on the Jicarilla Indian Reservation. And so he began, and so that's around the same time that Doty with the Air Force Intelligence met with Benowitz, because Benowitz was contacting the security there at Kirtland Air Force Base, telling about, you got all these weird crafts, and they were hovering over a weapons storage area that at that time had the largest storage of nuclear components, I think, in the U.S. So there was some concerns there. So anyway, the whole thing was turned into a disinformation deal with Doty encouraging Benowitz that, there indeed was ETs involved here, and that they had a secret base out in Dulce. Yeah. Or they didn't dissuade him from his theory, that all of that was going on. So that was like 1980. And there's a lot more to the story, but Benowitz at one point wrote a report called Project Beta, which Greg Bishop named his book after, revealing this Dulce base and everything was going on. And apparently Benowitz was developing some type of beam weapon at that time to trap the ETs there at Dulce and destroy them. He really went, this was a pretty brilliant guy. He was a physicist, but he went way off the deep end, and Air Force Intelligence were partly responsible for that.
Right. It really affected his mental health.
He got not locked up. His family admitted him to a mental health institution for a while. And he died around in the early 90s, but there was definitely some odd stuff going on around him. So that's kind of the first salvo of how the legend started with Dulce. Now, there may or may not be something there. You can really get deep in the weeds. Good book to read on this is Greg Valdez's book. He was Gabe Valdez's son. He was first hand to a lot of this craziness going on during that period. But so, next thing that happens, you want to hear all of this?
Sure.
Okay, in 1988, as the story goes, this there was this actually happened. The Dulce story, the legend that got passed around in '88 came from this lady going by the name of Ann West, who met with John Lear. You know who John Lear is, right?
Yeah, I do. That's one of the aviary fame. Yeah.
He wasn't an aviary, but he was part of that scene,
Right.
information sharing that was going on during that period. His former CIA pilot, his dad was the Learjet inventor, also invented the 8-track player.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But Lear had been a player for a while. He was one of the first people putting out information about Area 51 because he says he was a contract pilot for the CIA, so he knew things. But so anyway, this lady came to him, Ann West, claimed that she had known this fellow named Thomas Costello, who was, Thomas Castello, Castello. If you look on the web, you'll find Thomas Castello's story, or alleged story. But she claimed she knew Castello, and in 1979, Castello was a security guard at Dulce Base, and all the biogenetic experiments were going on. They were abducting humans. They were creating hybrids. All this stuff that later ended up in the X-Files.
Yeah.
Castello, if he even existed, claimed it was going on, that he was a security guard there, and there had been an uprising among a few of the ETs, and some of the human workers there, including Castello, got involved. And they had and so the reptilians running the show called in,
Those guys, always those guys.
Yeah, they called in their cronies. They got to deal with the government. The government brought in a Delta force and basically wiped out most everybody except Tom Castello, because Tom Castello was a security guard and he had something called a flash gun. It sounds like it was really bitching.
This wouldn't be like a rail gun, would it? That shoots like rails. That's a reference to an earlier episode, Rob. That's what I'm saying.
All bet.
No, I have a description of it somewhere, but it sounded pretty cool. These flash guns. So, anyway, he escapes from Dulce. They kidnap his. He escapes with Dulce with videotape images that shows the burbling vats with the little hybrids in them, and everything going on there, plus a bunch of documents, and
wow,
gets out and goes into hiding. And he made a copy of all these materials, supposedly. I don't believe any of this shit, but this was the official, the mythos that got started, and he made 6 copies of the materials, sent them to 6 different UFO researchers who were unknown to each other, one of whom was Ann West.
Okay.
So Ann West, she's revealed herself as Cherry Hinkle. Cherry Hinkle. She's on Facebook. In recent years, it's been revealed who she is. And anyway, as Ann West, she went to John Lear in 1988. Her story was, oh God. Anyway, she goes with Tom Costello. He's disappeared and he's considered he's dead. They got to him. So she brought this material to John Lear in '88, and it was released as the Dulce Papers. And if you look online, do a web search for the Dulce Papers, you'll see there's hand drawings of the little aliens in the burbling vats, and it'll show the Dulce base, and there's like 7 levels, and the level where all the bad juju is going on is called Nightmare Hall, and you'll hear people still talking about this stuff like it really happened. And so this mythology got inserted into the UFO research community, and I'm not going to tell all the secrets I know at right now who were the major players that started this besides Cherry Hinkle and John Lear, because that's what I've been working on in this piece.
Yeah.
Gets into a lot more depth, but so that's kind of how the mythology started with that, and it got. I won't name the individual now, but there was a whole nexus of people out of Las Vegas, and John Lear, Bill Cooper was part of it. Val Valerian, who was a retired Air Force intelligence guy named John Grace, a guy named Branton, another guy named Tal Levesque. All these guys started telling the same story, modifying it a little bit, and it got shot out, to the UFO research treadmill, and away we went. And so that became the thing. A lot of people, there's been no evidence that there was a Tom Costello. It seems he was a made-up character, kind of a composite character, in my opinion, based on Benowitz a little bit, and people who've claimed to be security workers who know about underground bases. All these things got kind of meshed together to create this Dulce-based story. So that was kind of the initial thing, and in '95, Phil Schneider shows up telling the same story of he's basically playing the role of Tom Costello now. He's telling Tom Costello's story, that he'd been in this firefight at Dulce Base, and he got wounded, and now he's a whistleblower who's come out to reveal his story.
Yeah, and he had this very, like, I've seen clips of him on YouTube or whatever, and he starts talking about this real, like, ultra American, I believe in the Constitution and and all this kind of stuff, and then he'll start talking about fighting aliens in this base, and it's just like, what in the world is going on here? And,
well, a lot of things morphed into the Patriot movement. I mean,
Bill Cooper,
he was totally into all of this, during that period. He was part of that scene with John Lear and those guys, and he started repeating some of these same stories, and at one point he kind of stepped away from, he started saying that all the UFO alien abduction stuff was basically disinformation, and he got deeper into the Patriot movement at that point. But and so let's see. Anyway, it's it's a complicated
it's a
story, but it the same time that was happening. Excuse me, just a second. Getting over a cold here. All of this stuff kind of happened at the same time. Around 1988 is when the Area 51 revelations came out.
Yeah.
And it seemed like whoever was cooking up a lot of this stuff, and part of it might have been government disinformation and ufologist, conspiracy theorists run with it. But a lot of the same stories were coming out about Area 51, that there was an underground base there, that there'd been a secret pact between the U.S. government and the aliens, and like the reptilian aliens had kind of gone rogue and they'd taken over the base. And you had the same story coming out of Area 51, and a lot of this. I learned about a lot of this stuff on the Billy Goodman Happening, which was this radio show out of Las Vegas. Back then, who latched on to a lot of this stuff, as well as George Knapp, who he was.
Right.
And it was kind of the same story. There was this security worker that came on the Billy Goodman happening, and he called himself Yellow Fruit. I don't know what that referred to, but he was sharing similar revelations. So, it's like here some of the same stories or the same boilerplate they were using about underground bases and security workers there, or in the case of Bob Lazar, he discovered what was going on, and that we were back engineering the crafts part of this exchange program with the aliens, and on and on and on.
Have you ever heard the Area 51 Art Bell phone call?
Yeah, it's hilarious.
Do you think that was a total setup?
Yeah.
Because I used to listen to it and be like, there's no way, this got to be real. Back in my younger, more naive days.
It's totally BS.
Before I understood disinformation and one thing about the disinformation.
I think it was just a joke.
Do you think it was just a joke?
You can hear Art saying, "Sir, you better go back now," and he's probably muting his mic, laughing his ass off about this.
Yeah.
I heard Phil Hendry did a couple of crank phone calls to Art Bell, and that might have been one of them.
Oh, interesting. Okay. About the disinformation stuff, I mean, that's interesting all in of itself, because they talk about Richard Doty, and there's a scene in that documentary where he talks to Linda Moulton Howe is talking about how Richard Doty showed her all this stuff.
She got sucked into it too, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because we had Peter Robbins on our show, and we talked to him about his book Left at East Gate, about the Rendlesham Forest, and about Larry Warren, and supposedly that. One of the things that's interesting about that is they pulled that same kind of stuff on Larry Warren and some of those other guys, and they probably also dosed them up with some kind of hallucinogen too, to make them think that there were actual aliens on the base, or that there were aliens underneath the base. And there were some very similar tactics that were used by the Air Force. Well, Doty was in the Air Force, and there was very similar tactics in that case that was used in all this Paul Benowitz case as well. So it seems like this is across the board.
I think it was all connected, and Doty might have been even related to that Rendlesham thing as well. Interesting. Because there was another incident called, about the Cash Landrum incident.
Yeah, yeah.
So, that happened just a couple days before or after the Rendlesham incident.
Yeah, I think it was after Rendlesham, I think.
And in about my head's starting to hurt talking about all this stuff because I've been writing about it. You know how convoluted this all gets.
Yeah.
I'm been into it pretty deeply. But have you heard of Doc? It was a live broadcast called UFO Cover Up Live from 1988.
It rings a bell, but I'm not familiar with the story, I don't think.
Mike Farrell was the host of this thing, Mike Farrell of MASH.
Yeah. Okay.
And they had on this show, you had Bill Moore and Stanton Friedman coming in talking about their sources they had for MJ-12 and the Roswell crash, which was all tied into this Doty stuff.
Right.
And they bring on a couple members of the aviary. I don't know why I'm having problems saying that. The aviary during the course of this show, and they're in shadows, and their voices are modified. And one of them is Falcon. Yeah. And it was actually Richard Doty on the show.
Right. Yeah.
As Falcon. Now, he later said he wasn't the real Falcon. He was protecting the identity of the real Falcon, whatever sense that makes. But they brought on the two ladies, Betty Cash and Vicki Landrum, that told their story, about, this huge diamond-shaped craft had shown up and was really hot, and it's like they got exposed to radiation, and then 23 helicopters showed up and escorted the thing away. And then they switched to Falcon, who comes on. It was Doty behind the scenes claiming that, yeah, it was a UFO craft that they were test piloting, and they lost control of it momentarily and whatever. So anyway, it was more muddling what was going on here with these ladies.
Right.
And you look at the ladies and they're nodding their heads. Yeah, thank God somebody's coming up with the claiming, that it was the government. And they later, but once again, it was just Doty muddling things up more. The ladies filed a lawsuit. Betty Cash was diagnosed with cancer not shortly after their sighting. And so, they felt they'd been screwed over by some secret government program. And so they got that lawyer, Peter Gersten, who's done other UFO cases and stuff. And eventually got dismissed at the circuit court level, where it was, basically they couldn't prove that the government had any of these diamond-shaped strange aircraft that the ladies saw. They had no way of proving it, and government experts came on, of course, denying it.
Yeah.
But so anyway, it was interesting that once again Doty had some relationship to that, whether he was part of that operation. As far as the diamond-shaped craft, who knows? But then, it's also curious that happened so soon after or before the whole Eastgate thing. Because I was thinking, before I'd heard that they'd happened so close together, I'd been thinking for a while that, that Eastgate or Rendlesham incident sounds a lot like all this other craziness that was going on with Benowitz, and it all seemed to happen during the same time period in 1980.
Yeah, that's true. I want to turn to, before we kind of let you go, I want to turn to a more lighthearted subject, and that would be you wrote
terrorism.
Yeah, sure. Well, actually, I wanted to talk about Eyes Wide Shut.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, I just watched it not too long, actually yesterday, in fact, for the second time. First time I watched it, I was probably around about 23 years old, and I hated it. I couldn't stand it. I thought it was a terrible movie. But since then, I've done a lot of reading, one of which is an article that you wrote, and about this particular movie. And I can tell you, I got a lot more out of it. What's kind of like your general thoughts on that? And do you think that, because a lot of people think, like Kubrick, like 4 days after he completed the movie, he died. And there's a lot of people that that think that he was killed because, of course, the famous scene in the movie is the big like Illuminati sex orgy in the middle of it, Mm-hmm. But you think there's some things to do with mind control as well in that film?
Well, perhaps.
Yeah.
What year was that released?
It came out in 99.
Okay, so this is going back a few years, and bear in mind I haven't watched it since 1999 when I wrote this article.
Yeah.
And during that period, I was pretty heavily into a lot of the mind control research and the so-called monarch sex slave programming. So within the film, there seemed to be a lot of allusions to the monarch programming, because they said they used like imagery from The Wizard of Oz, for instance. I found a lot of that in the movie. And there was just a lot of things. I'd have to go through this article again that jumped out on me. That
there was one thing that I read a little bit of it yesterday after I watched the movie,
mm-hmm.
and because I have the Beast of Adam Go Rightly, and Tom Cruise is talking to these two models, and it looks like they're gonna take him upstairs to go have some fun. And he asks him, "Where are we going?" And one of the models says, "We're going to the end, or like we're going over the rainbow." And then he goes to this later on. He goes to this costume shop to go to this costume for this top secret party, and it's called Over the Rainbow or something like that.
Right. I'm looking at the article here, Under the Rainbow. Yeah,
Yeah.
it seemed like he was going into this secret mind control world by, I don't know, that seemed like one of the initiations or what led him to that crazy scene there where that went down at that mansion with all the Illuminati sexiness going on.
Yeah, and one thing I noticed that there's a lot of play with color in that movie. Kubrick, I mean, you could do hours and hours of analysis on stuff on Kubrick, on like stuff that he put in movies. But like, you know, there's so much going on. Like every time that there's a woman pretty much on the screen, like Nicole Kidman, other women, they're always in blue. They're always standing next to this blue background. And I'm just sitting there thinking, what is going on? What is he trying to say here? You know? What is being said? And when he gets to the mansion itself is just engulfed in blue. And like the woman that's quote unquote saves him from being done to whatever by the Illuminati, she's also bathed in blue. And it's just like, and it's like the rainbow colors are all over the place in it too.
Well, let's do a Google search for mind control in blue and see what comes up. You know, maybe he was, getting into a lot of that literature during that period, and that was his inspiration, or maybe he knew things. I don't know. There was, you talk about different people analyzing Kubrick's work, and you'll get a lot of different theories or interpretations of stuff.
Right.
There's that movie I'm sure you're probably aware of. It was, what's it called? Room 237?
Room 237, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like there's 3 or 4 different points of views of what Kubrick was trying to say, and they point out subliminal messages, and each had a little different theory, and all of them made a lot of sense, It's like,
yeah.
But is there really... what was he really thinking? We don't really know for sure. I mean, there's a lot of weird synchronicities and stuff around his films. Excuse me 1 second here.
Well, another thing that I was going to bring up too was that the guy that playing the piano, and he's later playing the piano at the party. This is someone that Tom Cruise's character went to medical school with.
Yeah,
and he goes and he's the one that basically he finds out about the party from. And, his last name is Nightingale.
Oh,
and
there you go.
I know
yeah.
there's some things within the mind control literature, MK Ultra, that has to do with the words Nightingale. There's also the Bluebird, which that could be your blue thing there, possibly.
Yeah.
And then there's this whole idea in the movie that Nicole Kidman, his wife, like she tells him about this dream that she's having. And, the implication is either that Tom Cruise is just hallucinating everything that he witnessed, or she was actually at the party herself. It's just, there's so many layers there. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I'll have to watch it again. Like I said, it's been
a
few years now. Yeah, I don't think I saw it when it originally came out in 1999.
Right. I got to tell you, I did get a lot more out of it this time.
And there was a director's cut, too, that I was intrigued by, but that's probably not what's on those cheapskate Netflix streaming. So.
Probably not. Hey, do you think that there was any foul play with Kubrick? Do you think that he might have revealed too much? Did he fake the moon landing?
All of that is just fascinating. I don't know, but... if you interviewed Jay Weidner?
No, but that's someone that's on the list for sure to get on.
I mean, his theories are pretty damn compelling as well. That you can find some YouTube stuff of the research he's done. At least to me, is pretty convincing evidence that. Kubrick, might have been involved in faking the moon landing, and that he was basically, he made a deal. He got green lighted on a lot of his projects because of that, and got access to things that other people didn't get access to.
Yeah, and supposedly there's a lot of people that think in The Shining that he's actually revealing that he's revealing that he actually faked it in the moon in The Shining in certain scenes. Yeah, there's a lot of craziness. He changed so many, but it's like he changed so much of Stephen King's original book that King just hated it. He hated what he did to it. And you could almost see that Kubrick did all that on purpose so he could just turn it into his own and then just put all these weird things in it.
Right. And you got to understand that as a writer, that's, when you sell your work to somebody, even if it's a great director like that, they have their own vision. It's like Ken Kesey hated One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Right.
Which I thought was a damn good movie from a damn good book, but it wasn't Kesey's vision, so there you go.
And to add to that, just about Kubrick, too, I mean, A Clockwork Orange, I mean, if that movie's not about mind control, I don't know what is.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's about as blatant as it gets.
Yeah, really.
All his movies are pretty heavy, from Doctor Strangelove, and there's a synchronicity there that the day Doctor Strangelove was slated to premiere was the same day the JFK assassination went down.
Really?
So they had to postpone screening it.
Yeah, I know and this isn't Kubrick, but I know with The Manchurian Candidate, that movie I think came out the year before Kennedy was assassinated, and it just wasn't shown until I think in the 70s.
Well, Frank Sinatra ended up owning the rights to it.
Yeah.
And when his, JFK was a friend of his, so after the assassination, he just pulled it,
He must have felt that it wasn't appropriate, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's another brilliant movie as well that was ahead of its time.
Right. There's so much more that we could talk about, and we could spend like an entire day doing it. I would love to come out to California and hang out with you.
Certainly.
Or you come here to Nashville and take you to some esoteric spots.
Yeah, I was actually there a couple of years ago.
Yeah, you should come out sometime. Guy Malone's back in Roswell, so he's a little closer to you now. But he was here for a good while. But, we're gonna actually before we close out, tell everybody where they can get your books and where they can contact you.
Get the books on Amazon. Just punch in Adam Go Rightly, or the website adamgorightly.com, or I got a few different websites there. There's the Historia Discordia website, and my blog at Adam, whatever it's called, Go Rightly at WordPress.com. If they want to get a hold of me, they can contact me through the AdamGoRightly.com website. I'm also back on Facebook after getting locked out of my account and having to start another one. So I'm pretty easy to find.
That's what happened, huh? Do you still have the kooky Christian album covers and the Bongo Girl of the Week?
Oh yeah, that's on the that's on the blog there. Yeah, I think with the Facebook thing, I think since they changed their policy, it's not as easy for somebody to just complain about somebody.
Yeah,
and I think that's what happens to me. I got a few how people don't like you for some reason, and it becomes a passion with them to screw with you, trolls. And I assume somebody complained saying I wasn't the real me. And so, and that's happened to a lot of people, and there's not really much you can do about it once it happens, because as far as Facebook support, there really is no support, or there's several levels of bots, when you try to contact them.
Yeah.
I mean, they've designed that so they can buffer themselves from having to really deal with the people who use Facebook. But there's been this controversy here for a couple of years with drag queens that were losing their accounts because people were complaining they were fake people. The people who were complaining were just complaining because they didn't like drag queens. And so if you look on the web, you can see it became a big issue with the drag queen community, like in California and elsewhere, complaining about this whole situation with Facebook, and it's happened with a lot of people. Apparently, starting in December now, they've changed their policy a little bit, where if somebody's going to complain about you or whatever, they can't do it anonymously, which was what was going on before. You can say somebody posted some bad content or whatever, or is a fake person, but you didn't have to identify yourself. So I think that's changed, supposedly, a new policy that was supposed to happen.
I think so. I think so too.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the long story there. But I'm back on Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff.
Maybe it's the aviary or the reptilians that were complaining. Adam, thank you so much for being on, for coming, for helping us out with the 100th episode, and stay on the line for us. And guys, we will be back with another surprise guest on the Conspirinormal 100th episode. All right, guys, welcome to Conspirinormal. This, as we said before, is the Skype portion of the 100th episode, Extravaganza. And we have on the line Mr. Walter Bosley. And Walter, you are kind of still in the two guests on Conspirinormal Club. You were on episode 74. That was where we talked about all three of your Empire of the Will books, and episode 87, which that was both Secret Missions 1 and 2. And we talked to you about those. But I find your material so interesting, and I'm going to have you back on. I've already got you scheduled on to come back in February, so I wanted to bring you on for this kind of special episode here. So, how are things going over there in San Bernardino right now?
Oh, just other than whatever the FBI and the other cops might be, investigating for follow-up, things are business as usual here, really, other than I think you got some people who are a lot more aware and enlightened as to the threats outside of this valley, which often until now went, I wouldn't say ignored, but insulated.
Right.
Hey, can I ask Walter? Walter, did you get to walk through the house with all those other people when they opened up that bedroom?
No. Having done the work, I know that it's just best and more helpful to not be another body over there, getting in the way.
They said there was some just strangers walking through with drink cups and children walking through. So I think everybody was welcome.
I heard that and I was like, oh, geez, come on. However, I do think that's probably part of the investigative strategy. It's kind of like, and I'm not giving away any big secrets because, you've seen it in movies where, about firemen, where there's the arson investigator.
Right.
The video. And when you're an investigator, you're trained, you're federal agent, cop, or whatever, detective, you're trained to actually, in many cases these days, I think, take video of all the people standing around watching. And, I mean, we were trained to take photographs of the crowd if there were any looky-loos.
Yeah.
Because, that age-old thing about the perpetrator returns to the scene of the crime. So I think maybe they were looking to see who might have shown up.
Yeah.
And
interesting.
Yeah.
What was kind of like your initial reaction? Because to kind of preface this, if no one's listened to the show on the Empire of the Will, you had been looking at this case from 1915 that you believed was revolved around some like ritualistic human sacrifice.
Yeah.
And so you looked at that case, and you had constantly had been saying that look for something to happen in your area in this year, 2015. And sure enough, something really major does happen there.
Yeah, and I didn't expect it to be something so public. If you recall, in Empire of the Wheel 1, I can't remember which chapter it is. It's in one of the last chapters where Rick and I, we put it out there that, somebody or the circumstances as such, whatever, somebody might make something happen, or we might see the emergence of, and this is what I thought it was, emergence of a serial killer.
Yeah.
Honestly, that was the road that my mind was going down. We would see the emergence of a serial killer, which we might not know was going on until well into 2016. Farther down the road, once it would be discovered, and because that takes time. I did not, dummy me. Particularly dummy me when you think of Empire of the Wheel 3, the Nameless Ones, in which I put out a list of events that were very public, which I identify as possibly acts of black magic on the psyche of the public. I should have figured, looking back on it, well, yeah, it might be something very public, but that hindsight is 2020. But I wasn't expecting something like this, and it took me by surprise, but in that way, not so much. You know what I mean? As soon as I heard the reports that there was something going on, and I heard where it was, of course, the first thing I do is pull out my maps. And the map that I pulled out was one that I've had since 2008. And sure enough, there it was, right adjacent to an intersection of the telluric current ley line, so to speak. And then from there, the synchronicities just began to pile up.
Well, let's talk about some of those synchronicities. I know that one big one that you were looking at was the number 14 as being very significant.
Well, yeah, significant within this event and within the context of Empire of the Wheel, because basically here's what they are. The four biggies with this event are the date, okay? The 2nd of December 1915 is when a girl named Orla Hedges, a 14-year-old girl in Redlands, dies from eating a poisoned orange. That orange was poisoned with an unknown toxin. Never was specifically identified. And then here we have, on the 100th anniversary to the day of that girl's death, we have 14 victims of a terrorist attack. So, wow, on the 100th anniversary to the day of the 14-year-old girl's death, we have 14 victims of a terrorist attack on that day. So there's two biggies, the date and the number 14. Then, of course, we had the physical location. Now, we got a double whammy there because we have it adjacent to the intersection of these two telluric current ley lines, like I talk about and write about, but also the nearest main intersection of streets right there is Waterman Avenue and Orange Show Road. Now, I had discussed that one with, I was in the middle of discussing that one the other day with Secherie, associate of mine who provides me with these maps and such. And a person who had read the book had brought it up to me. It sent me an email or a message saying, hey, did you notice the Waterman Avenue Orange Show Road? And, I pointed out, very good, you're reading the material, because that's a synchronicity in itself. You see, we had another victim, a man named Isidore Jassot, who in October of 2015 drowned in Baldwin Lake, okay? So that's a man who dies in water.
October of 1915, right?
1915.
Okay.
Man who dies in the water, or Waterman. There's Waterman Avenue. Orla Hedges, the girl in 1915, on the 2nd of December, dies from eating a poisoned orange. There you have the orange connection, Orange Show Road. So at the intersection of Waterman and Orange Show Road, you're actually looking at the intersection of these two deaths, the man who died in the water and the girl who died from an orange. And there, 100 years later, to the day of her death, you have this terrorist attack. And then I would say that the real biggie is a couple of days after this happened, the FBI revealed that she had, the female terrorist now, here in 2015, had gone online and dedicated their activity, their act, their selves, whatever, they envision themselves doing, to the terrorist group ISIS. Now, here's the interesting thing. I argue that in 1915, this 14-year-old girl and the 6 other victims were all murdered or sacrificed in dedication to the goddess Hecate. Hecate is syncretic, okay, to the Egyptian goddess Isis. So therefore, Hecate is Isis, and the 14-year-old girl's murder was done in dedication to Hecate/Isis. And 100 years later, this terrorist attack is carried out in dedication to ISIS, the terrorist group. But there we have the synchronicity: ISIS, Hecate.
And I want to be clear with this, because you're not saying that this is some shadowy group necessarily that is setting this up, and that it's a false flag, and they're really behind this. They really pulled it off, and they blamed these guys. What you would more likely say is that there's more like a spiritual influence, or these things are just designed to happen.
It's the weird fabric there's 3 possibilities I put out there. Here's the thing. Regardless of what the possibilities are, these 2 idiots and whoever else was helping them, these 2 idiots, these morons, were the ones who did this attack. This was not a false flag. Now, do I suspect that there's little elements we're not being told, that there may be some things out there people saw that haven't been explained yet? Sure. And that's standard in some investigations. They might be holding some stuff back because they do need to, bring in some more people or something. But no, I do not, and I did not at any part of this think this was any kind of false flag. I knew that people jumped on that one immediately. No, this is what it was. However, the weirdness connected to it, my 3 possibilities I put out there is, number 1, that in just the weird fabric of space-time, whatever, reality, the ether, these kinds of patterns, show up for better or worse. Or the act of magic, this is getting a little esoteric now, the act of magic 100 years ago injected certain data into the time-space fabric, so that then these injections continue within context of the original magic act. In other words, it's the gift that keeps on giving in a very dark way.
Right.
Okay? The third possibility is that, and this is the one that's far out there, the third possibility is that somebody associated with the group 100 years ago, which we have no reason to think went away and disappeared, their descendants, this whole tradition, or whatever it is, this dark tradition, might have been passed on. We have no reason to think it didn't, and I implied as much with the Zodiac Killer chapter in the first book. It could be that somebody associated with that group had some connection to these terrorist idiots, and might have been an influence on, hey, do it on this day, hey, make sure you kill X number of people or something. I'm just throwing that out there.
Right.
That's a possibility that has to be considered. But that aside, no, these idiots did do the killings. It was a terrorist-motivated attack. It was not a false flag. Manipulation of individuals is a different thing from those things. So that's all the strange mix that's out there.
Strangely enough, when I had you on the first time and we talked about Empire of the Wheel and we talked about Hecate, I had told you that, Hecate is not the first time that Hecate had actually come up on this show. And Dr. Future here that is with me, he has actually done some research on that himself. Mm-hmm. So you guys should correspond on some of that. It would be interesting. Yeah. Anything you want to add to that, Dr. Future?
No, I'm not an expert on any of that. What precipitated with me was from a totally different direction. I was looking at some stuff out of all things Bible prophecy in Revelation chapter 8 when it talks about wormwood being called from the sky. And I can't go into all of it here, but there's a direct, and in fact, it even involves a revival of things like absinthe today. And the spiritual portals open from consumption, that it's a wormwood-based product that was used long ago for, I guess, evocation or invocation, and its names is Artemis. Absinthium Artemis, and then it ties directly to Artemis or Isis or Hecate. And
right.
There are several pictures, if you look in that passage in Revelation 8, where it talks about, it's said that it's a star, and it's elsewhere described in Revelation as being an angel, a star, and it has keys, and that's what Hecate was a liminal goddess with the keys to the spirit world, and also being associated with like a torch or a flame, and that's how it's described in Revelation, being thrown down.
Two torches.
Yeah.
Two torches from the Greek tradition,
yeah,
indeed.
And through various other information that's in there, and in fact, it talks about the waters. So the word hydros there is synonymous with the waters that's described by the angel in Revelation as being peoples and nations, and it says that they're made bitter because of their contact. And I now see this more as a description of an evocation of Hecate by followers on the ground. That actually wormwood is brought forth because she's summoned, and it says as a byproduct, a lot of the nation, a lot of people will lose their life because of this. And I think that would be anything to actually invoke Hecate would be through a mass sacrifice of people, and it would also facilitate spiritually the ability for her to open up the keys to the abyss, which happens to free her brother Apollyon or Apollo in the first few verses of Revelation 9. So I think, to me, I see possibilities of this kind of worship of her, whether said directly by that name or not. As days get to the final days of Earth, I could see that really increasing and people wanting to see these kind of events occur. Of course, what comes out of the abyss they may not like when it happens, but that they could see this as something they would want to actually initiate on their own watch.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. All that makes a sense to me. You know, having, as you know, when you look into this whole Hecate thing, you see all these things. What I came away with in my research, you know, over the course of, I think it was like 7 or 8 years, is and the experience that I had on that research, I came away with a sense of there's Hecate, whatever she is, and then there's the spin that various people put on her for their own purposes. And I use a pronoun just because, you know, the symbol of Hecate is the goddess. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of like electricity. You can use electricity for very positive things, and we do in our society. But electricity can also be, you know, a very negative thing because it's very dangerous. And I came away with a view of Hecate as she just is, and depending upon the application of an evocation of her power, you get bad or good, dark or light, depending. And it just so happens that because of certain dramatic aspects of her nature, I think more people have attributed or tried to tap into that dark energy of it. But I think I have found evidence of an attempt to tap into the light side energy with her presence in civic-minded pursuits in this area. So it's really interesting. I totally see what you're talking about, and yeah, that is there. That's the thing. All that dark stuff is there. So it's just something that to be careful with, and I think there's people out there who have not been careful with it. And
I'm not familiar with the positive side of it. I just had not come across it in my limited research, because it seemed to me in the ancient world she was almost worshipped more out of fear. Yeah. And that's why they would leave offerings to her where like 3 roads met, and they were concerned about her or her minions coming and taking their babies and things like that.
Yeah, the association with Lilith and such. And and I found all that too, and it was really, I think you can tell when I went into the research on the first book, she was very much the dark figure, the dark, scary, almost evil figure. And then by the time I'd finished the years of research and got to the third book, I had come to this place where it's like, okay, she kind of just is. And she's out there, and or she or whatever it is out there. It is, and it's something to not play with, to certainly not communicate directly with, so to speak.
You know, one interesting thing about her, by the way, is that I may have my mythology confused, but it seems like she sort of played a neutral role in the battle of the gods and the titans, and she was allowed to maintain her position in the heavens.
No, you have not got your mythology mixed up at all. All those things you said are accurate. They're out there.
Yeah.
But there's even, there's even more in the other side. And I think maybe the reason we don't see the other side, the lighter side, is because there is the admonition of Isis, the goddess Isis, and that's, of course, Isis Hecate. And that admonition is this: when she lifts her veil, because she is the veiled goddess in her Isis aspect, when she lifts her veil to show you her true nature, the truth about her, you are to tell no one. That's like a gift to you. That you're not supposed to say anything about that. Well, it might be that, when she lifts her veil, so to speak, and those who have seen that realize, okay, there is, like you said, a neutral aspect, which, neutral is both light and dark, good and bad. Those who keep their mouth shut are probably keeping their mouth shut more about the lighter side, because the darker side is so much more useful, right, in our world, because people are superstitious and fearful, and it's easier to control people with darkness and scary stuff, right? So I think maybe that's why some very dark things have been done in her name. If we were to personify her, it might be like this. She's sitting up there, on Mount Olympus saying, hey, all this dark crap these people have done in my name, I don't advocate this. This is all them. It's on them. And in the end, they'll pay for it through karma or whatever. I imagine a possible scene like that. It could be. But, like I said, she's someone that it is out there, and you kind of respect its power, and you just go about your business.
Right.
It's not something to play with.
Walter, we're running out of time here. We got to get the next people on, but real quick, just kind of give us a little bit, kind of like a little teaser on the next book that's should be coming out actually this month, right?
Yeah, I'm hoping to get it out sometime between Christmas Day and New Year's Day, and I'm getting close. Basically, it's Origins, the 19th century emergence of the 20th century breakaway civilizations, in which I present basically just that, how the whole airship mystery and the breakaway civilization issue of the 20th century did not begin in the post-World War II era, that it actually has its roots going back before the 1850s. And that's what the book is about, is presenting my argument and evidence for that. And I look forward to talking about that with you.
Excellent. Well, we're looking forward to it. We got you scheduled for February on that. And
is it February or January?
February. February 8th. Just one thing to point out that I found interesting that I found out this week was that Eagles of Death Metal, the band that was on the stage at the in Paris when the major attack occurred, they have a song called San Bernardino Sunburn that is about San Bernardino, or at least mentions it in the title. So I found that a very interesting coincidence, at least. So
yeah, and there they were in Paris during that attack, and they survived it.
Right, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Bosley, and
thanks for having me on, guys. I enjoy being on and talking with you.
Absolutely. You stay on the line with us just real quick. We're going to close this segment out. We'll be back with another guest. All right, guys, we are back yet again with another guest for the Conspirinormal 100th episode, Skype call edition. And on the line, I have one of my favorite guests that we've had on the show, and that is Mr. Nick Redfern. Welcome back to Conspirinormal, Nick.
Adam, thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming back on. We're going to have another guest joining us here at 4:30 that I'm sure you'd be excited to speak to. But I kind of wanted to go over real quick the episodes that I've had you on. And that is, the first episode was episode 29 back in May of 2013. and that was where we talked about the your book Final Events that had you also did an interview with my good friend Dr. Future here on. Episode 56, which was August of 2014, and that was about Close Encounters of the Fatal Kind. And just this year in June, episode 83, we talked about your book Secret History. So you have been on the show a grand total of 3 times, and now a 4th, I guess, if you count this. So, I kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about your trip to Brazil. I saw that you just went there not too long ago, and I've of course have some connections to Brazil myself, and I've been there a couple of times, and I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on. Well, first of all, what was it that you did, and what did you think of Brazil?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was a cool event. I actually just got back on Tuesday, so I've only been back like 4 days, 5 days. And it was the UFO forum that's put on by AJ Javard, and I'd never been to Brazil before, so it was sort of cool to, I enjoyed traveling around. So for me, it was cool to go and see Brazil for the first time and South America for the first time. And it's sort of a huge event that runs Friday through Sunday, and there's about 20 or so speakers, talking on all different aspects. And the reason why I was speaking there was because back in 2011 I did a book called The Real Men in Black, and the company that published it, New Page, they did a deal with AJ to publish a Brazilian edition of the book. So I was out there essentially just promoting the book and doing a lecture on the history of the Men in Black and the different theories for who they were. But it's a really well-attended conference, and it's about an audience of about 500, something like that each day. And, it's all sort of run really good. And what sort of really impressed me was the fact that there's 4 of us there who were English speakers. And, of course, it's not their native language. So what they do, all of the audience, all 500, are given a set of free headphones, and what they have this guy named Carlos, who's a really good translator. So when I'm speaking on stage, he's literally only about a second behind me, translating into Portuguese, and everybody can sort of see you on stage and see the images, but they're hearing the translation coming through pretty much immediately through the headphones. So it's sort of really well-run conference, and on top of that, I sort of got a lot of insight into the nature of the UFO phenomenon in Brazil, where a lot of close encounter cases were discussed, abductions, contactee cases, and also quite a lot of violent and hostile reports as well, which we seem to get from South America for some reason more than pretty much anywhere else. So it was sort of a good overall experience, and there's plenty of hot Brazilian girls running around as well, so that's sort of that to it all,
Right. 2 cases I can think of from Brazil specifically was the one in Belém that was, I think, in the late 70s, where people actually had like radiation burns from whatever they encountered. And then the other one was the one that Roger Lear wrote about. What was that place called, Mike? Do you
Virginia or something?
Yeah,
like
Virginia.
That, yeah.
Minas Gerais. Yeah.
He talked about that at one of the crash retrieval conferences we were at. Had a great talk on it.
I don't know why they get so many, sort of confrontational ones down there, but they do. But, for me, the cool thing was to sort of hear some of the, like I said, the cases that probably you don't hear too much outside of Brazil. They've got a huge following in Brazil, and AJ's got his own sort of glossy newsstand magazine, which has been going a long time now. But I think, I know I should say that from what I heard at the conference, certainly a lot of the really cool stories of contact cases, etc., I just never heard of them before. And I think, that sort of demonstrates that, we're, on one hand, we're doing well in terms of sharing in data, but on the other hand, there's still a lot more going on in, this country or that country that other people just don't hear about, despite even the internet.
Did you get to meet Coffin Joe while you were there?
Who?
Coffin Joe.
Coffin Joe.
He is like the national figure of Brazil. He's like the combination Freddy Krueger and Michael Meyer, and he stars in their movies like At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul or Midnight I'll Possess Your Corpse.
Okay.
And he has created a whole mythology that's unique to Brazil around what he's created. And he has a show that has been on for decades. It's almost like an Art Bell kind of show, talking about the darker side of these kind of things. And yeah, he is a legend in Brazil. You have to look up Coffin Joe.
I'll do that.
Was this the first book that was published first book of yours that was published in Brazil?
Yeah, it was. A lot of my books have been published in various other countries, but yeah, that was the first one in Brazil.
Oh, wow. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, since I have you here, is, we talked recently to Dr. David Jacobs when he had his new book out, Walking Among Us. And you had written an article, I believe it was for Mysterious Universe, which a good friend of ours sitting right across from me also writes for. And we, you kind of equated some of what was in Dr. Jacobs' books with some of the studies on Men in Black. What were some of the similarities that you kind of saw there?
Well, yeah, I mean, until I read his book, I knew the research, and I got his earlier book, The Threat, when that came out, late 90s or whatever it was. But it was only when I read his new book that I realised, because I've written 3 books on the Men in Black, that I realised how close some of the reports of the Men in Black were to the so-called hybrids. Now, when people think of the Men in Black, a lot of people think of like Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, from the movies. Yeah. But the real Men in Black are sort of far, they don't look like government agents at all. They sort of look far creepier. They're sort of skinny, short, pale skin and large eyes. And they wear these wraparound sunglasses, pull down fedoras, as if they're trying to camouflage themselves and try and move amongst us, which is sort of one of the main themes of David Jacobs' book. But some of the things that really hit home were things like where he talks about how the hybrids have to be taught to eat food and drink and things like that. And you find that in a lot of Men in Black cases where they act in an awkward fashion when people try to offer them food or drink. You also find about how, for example, in David Jacobs' book, he talks about how the hybrids have to be taught about sex and relationships and intimacy.
Right.
And there have been some weird cases where the Men in Black have asked questions of the witnesses about sex, but it comes across in a way as if they don't really understand properly what they're talking about. So, you get strange things like that. And also, where there's some cases where the hybrids would sort of steal little mementos, when they're mixing with people, and that has turned up in Men in Black cases. There's a famous one from Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where a journalist named Mary Heyer, who was investigating Mothman and Men in Black reports, she was confronted by one of these little weird Men in Black, and he stole her pen and then gave this sort of weird cackling laugh and ran off into the night. So, you find a lot of things like this, but I guess when you put all these issues together, and the fact that the Men in Black, for the most part, kind of look semi-human but semi-alien as well, it sort of really made me think, wow, this is actually an extremely close comparison with the Men in Black. So, I found that kind of intriguing.
Right, and I believe there was other cases that were in also John Keel described in the Mothman prophecies. There was several different cases where I think there was one where a Man in Black came in to visit this family and was basically asking about like the what utensils he should use to eat and just weird stuff like that.
Yeah, and bear in mind, that book, well, the investigations, should say, was sort of done back by Keel in the late 60s, mid to late 60s.
We're talking almost 50 years
way
ago.
Before all the David Jacobs stuff. So it kind of makes me think that the hybrid angle is actually not something relatively new. It may be newly identified, but if it is going on, it seems to be going on for a hell of a long time.
What do you think of Jacobs' work? And have you guys ever actually met each other?
No, I don't think I've ever even spoke to him either. Yeah. But I find the whole thing fascinating, mainly because, as I said, for years I've focused, a huge amount of research on the Men in Black, and I see so many parallels. I probably, admittedly, wouldn't have taken so much notice had it not been for the fact that all these really weird and kind of profound similarities sprung out at me when I read his book. So that made me take even more notice of it. But even I'll be the first to admit, when you start talking about aliens that look like us and they're being changed and they're infiltrating us, the more controversial it gets.
Right.
The more it kind of polarizes people into believers and disbelievers rather than, oh, well, that's interesting. I think the more extreme it gets, it tends to, focus people from different angles. But yeah, that was the main reason why I found it so interesting, was because it really automatically, and immediately I realized that what he was talking about actually cropped up in numerous Men in Black stories.
One thing too that kind of concerns me, and I actually did bring this up with him when we had him on the show, was it's kind of like if these hybrids or hybrids, as he calls them, if they are so indistinguishable from people, then you're going to have people that, whether a significant amount of the population doesn't believe this or not, you're still going to maybe have somebody that does believe it. And are people going to start getting paranoid and thinking that there's hybrid aliens or hybrid aliens trying to take over? And, are we going to see people start to get hurt? I mean, we have enough mass hysteria as it is in this country. Let's it seems
we
like
need to stop their immigration.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, a lot of these sort of phenomena, when you start talking about people who aren't necessarily real people and things infiltrating us and moving amongst us, I can understand how, it would sort of create this atmosphere of paranoia and just, over-the-top behavior in some people. I mean, kind of a perfect analogy was a couple of years ago when we had the Ebola outbreak. I live in Dallas,
right.
And
yeah.
The guy who flew over and died from Ebola eventually, he was hospitalized in Dallas, and then there were two nurses in Dallas who got Ebola. But fortunately, they recovered. But if you look back at the stories that were circulating then, there were people calling for, Dallas to be quarantined and for emergency laws to be put into place, and the Patriot Act, and the military brought in. It was as if as if the zombie virus had broke out in Dallas. It had to be contained before America gets just infected by zombies. And after a couple of weeks, a week or so, it died down. Everybody forgot about it. But you can still find those stories, saying martial law in Dallas is needed right now. And I think that could be a kind of a similar thing that would, or could erupt at least. You would have, even if the theory is not proven, if it was gained substantial, strength and movement, and the idea of this just really picked up, I can understand that you'd have a few nuts out there who would be sort of roaming the streets, with armed to the teeth, looking for hybrids that still haven't been proven to exist. You know what I mean? Right.
Yeah, I totally understand. But I have a man in black sitting right across the way from me here, Mr. Micah Hanks, and kind of wanted to get his insight a little bit on this, like what Nick's been saying.
My insight on what?
On the whole,
yeah, that's
Black
right. I was
Dr. Jacobs stuff.
I was deneuralized, apparently. You want my opinion, or you want me to ask Nick his opinion again?
No, your opinion.
You want my opinion? Yeah. Well, as far as hybrids in our midst, genetic breeding programs, alien visitation. I suppose anything's possible, but I don't really buy it.
Yeah,
I think David Jacobs' research is interesting, and I've talked about this to you privately, Adam, that I think he's kind of been castigated by the UFO community as a result of alleged, misconduct in relation to the Emma Woods affair. And I don't think that that necessarily that circumstance should have painted him as quite a bad light as it did, and he's put up, in fact, a website that's sort of a rationale for why he feels that he was mischaracterized as a result of that. Again, this being something Nick probably knows a lot more about than I do, because I don't follow that angle of the ufological thing as much, I think, as certain other threads. But again, what I do know of it, and having read some of Jacob's justifications for his attempts at trying to conduct research with regard to, for instance, the Emma Woods affair, it seems that she was a fairly volatile individual. He had been trying to go about this scientifically and gather samples, including at one point underpants. And he feels that he was mischaracterized for that. And I feel that had he been a scientist who was really trying to go about serious research, obtaining hard physical evidence of something, if it had been anything other than a subject related to, for instance, as it was in this case, alien abduction, it might have seemed more justifiable. I think that what really was the salt on the wound was, in addition to the allegations made against him, he was also one of these wackos who was looking into alien abduction. I'm not calling him a wacko, but I'm saying that this is the general attitude that most people have. And I'm someone who more and more my research has led me further and further away from the abduction component. And there are good reasons why, which, tell you the truth, Nick and I have looked at independently and compared notes on a few times, because many of the high-profile UFO abductions of yesteryear bear a number of interesting similar threads that suggest time and time again earthly threads. One notable example that I won't get into, but I'll mention here, is the Antonio Villaboas case from the 1950s, was it, Nick? What was the year? Yeah.
50s,
yeah. Which was
57, I think.
It was a fascinating story. And just to very briefly paraphrase, that case, I remember saying, well, surely if this was some sort of an exotic object, he wouldn't have mistaken a helicopter. And I remember Nick Redfern on the telephone with me saying, let's not jump to conclusions here. And he gives a description from the actual description given by Antonio, which sounded, in retrospect, remarkably like a helicopter, which is interesting. And that doesn't say that people don't have strange encounters, weird things don't really happen, and that certain UFOs may not actually be something of non-conventional sources. But again, with regard to Jacobs, I think that part of the reason that he's been mistreated and viewed the way that he is because of his research and the way that his alleged conduct relates to this, again, seemingly bizarre subject, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, actually, Michael makes good points there. I mean, because the more controversial the subject that you investigate is, the more likely you're going to have people, like I say, who fall into two categories: those who fully buy into it, and those who say this is just complete crap,
Yeah.
And it's kind of like the same reason why you have that with the contact T movement of the 50s. They had massive, followings in the 50s, but then on the other hand, you had people like Donald Kehoe at the time who just would have nothing to do with that kind of thing. Because it was so extreme, the idea of human-looking aliens with long hair, and hot space babes strutting around and that kind of thing. People wrote it off as garbage. And I think, as I said, that the reason why, I don't say I buy into it, but why I think I may be more open to the hybrid angle is because of all these subtle little things that over the years of doing, a hell of a lot of research into the Men in Black, I found little things that you wouldn't really notice or think about had you not sort of really delved into the Men in Black mystery and seen the parallels. So that's why I found it interesting. It wasn't so much I found it interesting because it was just through reading the book. It was because of the tie-ins with the other stuff I'd done that mirrored some of those things. And that's sort of the extent of my interest in it, is sort of looking at the idea of, well, are these all manifestations of the same thing? They seem to be, but it's all sort of driven by the parallels between the two different things, rather than me just picking up the book and going, wow,
And you can even go back and look at maybe a century later from the time period of the events that you're describing with the Mothman prophecies. You could go back and look at that and say, what were the fairies doing? Yeah. I mean, there's very similar aspects in fairy lore that there is to the whole UFO abduction phenomenon. So where I would think that I would probably disagree with someone like Jacobs, and I said this on the show, is that if you're looking at things from a materialistic point of view, I think that what he's saying makes sense to him. But if you look at it from maybe a more, let's say, non-tangible or a kind of, not inner space, not outer space point of view, things begin to make a little bit more sense, even though you can still go down that rabbit hole and it becomes even more confusing, but that's a whole other aspect of it.
No, you're right. And, I think this sort of demonstrates sort of the sheer weird nature of the whole UFO phenomenon. You become immersed in not just the phenomenon, but the weirder aspects of it, and then the personalities in the subject and the clashes between personalities, and but that's ufology. That's how it's always been. Somebody has an issue with somebody's research today, in the same way somebody 60 years ago says, "Well, that photograph looks like it." That UFO is hanging on a piece of cotton or whatever. You always get this. And in that sense, not a great deal has changed. It's just a field filled with controversy and controversial people.
When you were in Brazil, was there anybody tell you any personal stories that they had?
Not really, mainly because of the language barrier more than anything else.
Right.
But when I was able to, although I didn't understand all the lectures, from the images and so on of the case, it was pretty clear. People were talking about a lot of, not lights in the sky or even just UFOs, but sort of face-to-face contact. There was a lot of that, those kind of stories being told in the lectures. And certainly far more than you get in a lot of other countries. So that was sort of another kind of trend, not just the hostile type of reports, but far more close encounter type events, literally close encounter events, than we seem to get today over here. Sort of those good old days of, somebody's driving home late at night and, they have an encounter and they're taken on board a craft. We don't really see that many of those reports now over here, but Brazil seems to still get a ton of them.
Nick, when you study this phenomenon and you look at different cultures, do you see differences in the cultures of how the phenomenon manifests and how they react to the phenomenon? Because you kind of typified the Brazilian experience as more of a hostile experience, and I suppose that we have that here in like the United States or Western Europe, what have you. But there are some more positive experiences, but you kind of typified that theirs is more, like you said, more hostile. So do you see some differences cross-culturally?
Well, yeah, I do. And I think that entire issue of, how the phenomenon manifests in one country versus another is interesting. And that's one of the reasons why I think that I don't think the UFO phenomenon is visionary, but what I do think is that it may have the ability to sort of manifest in a fashion that is applicable to the people of that era or location or whatever. In other words, the possibility that when people saw the Space Brothers in the 50s and that kind of thing, if you look at a lot of those accounts, they almost come across as like shamanic accounts, going out into the desert and communing with these higher entities. So I sometimes wonder if we've ever really seen these entities the way they really look. Maybe one person's space brother is another person's grey, is another person's hybrid, is another person's demon or whatever, or incubus.
Yeah.
That, all these things seem interlinked and very similar in many respects. But maybe it's not just a case of people interpreting them as incubus or succubus or demons. Maybe that's how they literally looked for the people of those eras, in the same way they literally look like the greys today and they literally look like long-haired people in the 50s. Perhaps a lot of it is in rendering the person into an altered state and presenting them in like an archetypal form. I think that might explain why we have sort of a multitude of different entities and a multitude of different types of craft that people see. People in the 50s and 40s reported flying saucers, but if you got down to the subtle descriptions, it was like almost every craft was slightly different to another, rather than just you would expect coming out of on a conveyor belt type situation. And so, again, I think that has a lot to do with this. Like in England, certainly when you had all the abduction stuff going on at a really high level in the US, with the era of like Hopkins and Strieber and all that kind of stuff. In England, you weren't getting much of that. People were still seeing, the Space Brothers. So that was even like a cultural thing between the UK and the US, which really
very good point. Yeah,
not too much different, really. But the reports were quite different.
It just seems to me that that this phenomenon, that it reflects almost the concerns, the issues, maybe even the zeitgeist of the time, and it seems like whatever these entities are, that they just reflect that back to us.
Well, and again, that could be part of it could be some process we don't understand. I mean, what I would say is that when you get that, it does seem to me that a lot of UFO events are staged. Like we used to get all these reports in the past of people running into aliens taking soil samples at the edge of the road. Well, it's like, how many times can they make the mistake of being seen taking soil samples?
Right.
And it's like it is staged. And I think that it's almost like it's a theatrical play. And I think that comes, for some reason, whatever the reason is, I don't know, and I don't pretend to know. But I think there's some reason why they want these encounters to occur. They want to be seen, but they want to be seen as if it's actually happening by accident rather than design.
Yeah, exactly.
I think they want us to see them. They want us to know something's going on. But they do it in a way that I said is like stage managed, theatrical, and maybe it's done to present themselves in a way that's actually different from what they are. Maybe it's to try and teach us on an individual basis, or help us grow, or maybe it's something just to screw with the natives to see how we can alter their belief systems.
Right. Well, Nick, we're going to make a call to Area 51 in Roswell, New Mexico.
Oh, not the real Area 51. Have you got a hotline number?
Well, we actually are calling Area 51.
Maybe we should be like phoning some bunker 12 stories down or something like that.
Hey, if you're going to do that, Adam, can I ask Nick my Area 51 mystery? Maybe he could solve it. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead.
Hey, Nick. This is Doc Future here. The first time I went to Area 51, the second time I went with the gentleman sitting next to me, but the first time I went with my older brother, who's a licensed minister, very level-headed guy, quite a bit older than me. And we drove out and got the little map at the alien for the little black mailbox, and where you turn to head up to the sign, you go no further than that. Well, we went out there, and of course we picked the ideal time. It just started turning dusk and dark. And we got out on the real gravelly road that gets thicker and thicker gravel, I guess, to keep people out up to the entrance. And, of course, it doesn't rain out that area at all up there in the high desert. And so we were just producing this massive plume of dust behind us as we're just slowly trying to drive up to the entrance. And big thing, that's what we had, this red light that kept shining in our...
Keep talking, Mike.
Red light shining in the back. And
hey, guy. We're in the middle of a story.
I'm telling an area. This is Doc Future. I'm telling a Area 51 story. If you can bear with me, to Nick. So
fantastic. Good timing.
Yeah, you could solve this mystery too. Anyway, as we're driving, we see this red light that keeps shining in the window behind us, and I kept thinking, is it my taillight reflecting or something? But there was nothing that we could do to determine it. Well, we started coming up, counting off the tenths of the miles till the map says you get to the area. And it was flat out there. Our headlights could shine everywhere, except there was a small little berm, just slightly taller than a person, that you had to bend to the right to get around to get up to the entrance. And as we came up and started going around the corner, there was a car. And again, we hadn't seen a car for, better part of an hour. And there's this car parked there facing the other direction like it was leaving, and there was a man standing next to the door like he was talking to the person in the driver's seat. This man standing with this long robe and this long white beard and holding a staff in his hand. And it was so strange because it got really, really cold all of a sudden. And my brother's one of these guys that nothing ever scares him. But he was really unnerved, like I was. And I guess our first instinct should have been to stop and find out what was going on. But we were only a stone's throw from where the sign was, the keep out sign. And so we ran up there to go get my picture in front of it. And as soon as we got out, the lights went out on our car immediately, as soon as we got out of the car. And so we went and turned them back on, and they flashed their headlights up on the mountains around there to let us know that they were there. And so I ran up, got my picture in front of the sign, and immediately hopped back in the car, less than a minute. So we turned around to leave. Now, you have to remember, this is all flat, totally flat out there. The dust cloud plume we were making, you could see for forever. We turn around, and we get to the spot where the car was and the man, and there's nobody to be found. There's the man, the car, nothing. We can look down the road the distance. There's nothing there. And since the year since that happened, I've asked my brother numerous times, did I dream that or was that real? He says, yeah, I experienced the same thing. So I wondered if you had ever, either of you two gentlemen, had ever heard of any kind of apparition of somebody in a robe and a long beard and a staff in his hand around something like Area 51.
No, I've never heard anything like that, no.
Well,
same here, sir.
I know that sounds nuts, and I probably should be institutionalized, but really, probably for other things other than that. But I would swear. Is that right? Well, I would
Maybe other people will start seeing it now that you've made it cool.
Yeah, probably it's the power of suggestion.
Yeah,
but
that's what we were just talking about.
Yeah,
too.
Either that, or I'm going to go pretend I'm that guy, just stand out there and raise some money. I'll just take on that persona. But anyway, I just wondered if y'all ever heard a story like that.
Well, guys, we were just joined by Guy Malone. Say hello to everybody, Guy, direct from Area 51 in Roswell, New Mexico.
This is Guy Malone reporting from Roswell. Yes, I've moved into a little cubicle. It's really called a booth in our local flea market, which is an indoor flea market. So I have an upstairs booth, and randomly, I was moving into the one that was available, was number 55, and I'm not even all the way moved in yet, and people start moving out of number 51. And actually, they hadn't even been here for a year. Their doors are always locked, lights are always off, and somebody told me they pay their rent, but they're never here. And a couple weeks after I started moving into 55, they started moving out of 51. And I'm like, well, I got to take that, if that's available. So, yes, I am in Area 51. FM, I call it. It is my location in Roswell, New Mexico. So the Area 51 in Nevada is never open to the public, but I'm here several weekdays for you now.
Do you think you'll ever get plumbing there or anything? I hate to hear you living out of a cubicle.
No, there's no plumbing here, but, there's plumbing in the sense of I can go downstairs and there's a bathroom only for employees of the location.
Okay.
Every one of the vendors here has a key. There's easily 40 vendors, maybe over 50 since I'm in number 51, but it's not for the public.
Well, I
live here.
Oh, I was going to hope you could get an apartment one day. Okay.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I got to rephrase or be careful when I say that this is the home of Guy Malone.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, guys, what?
Area 51's the day job.
Got it.
Of Guy Malone, and I'm waiting tables at night, as everybody that knows me knows I do some of that.
So guys, Nick, when was the last time you and Guy spoke?
Well, actually, I ran into Guy at the what was the conference? What was it called again?
It was MUFON, I think, Bernalillo, New Mexico.
Yeah, I know. I mean, is that what it was? But it was the regional MUFON. Yeah, the New Mexico MUFON. That was like a couple of months ago, but that was the first time. I think probably a few years, wasn't it? Really.
It had been several years.
It may have been actually Angel Fire a few years ago. It might have been Angel Fire.
Good memory. Angel Fire was 2009. I was just thinking about you in that event.
Yeah,
Thank you
was probably
again.
That's probably the last time I saw you.
Yeah, 2009. I was thinking next time I see Nick, I should thank him again for reading my paper that I presented there before I went on. It gave me a little more confidence knowing that I could present that view, with you scanning through it to make sure it was actually logical, coherent, and all that. That really helped me by the time I got up on the podium to deliver the talk, that you had kind of read it and said, yeah, it makes sense to me. You present logical argument, yada, yada, yada. Thank you again. That's all. And Mike, Dr. Future, it was great talking to you are you staying around as well?
I'm here. I have nowhere else to go.
Yeah, we've got him tied up to the chair, to the couch right now. So
Robert Hyde's here too. Hey, Guy. Since you've been back to Roswell, has there been any more sightings of that weird creature there with the silver face and the upside down sunglasses?
Not in a while.
Really?
I've not run into him. I'll put it that way.
Because he's more famous than the aliens at Roswell, the old ones that crashed.
The gray or the green skin, depending on who you talk to.
Yeah.
Depending on who's lying to you.
Yeah. Yeah, the upside down sunglasses, that was the creepiest part to me.
Well, gentlemen, since you Guy, you're in Roswell, and you guys have a very similar, I think, take on what happened there. I mean, what's kind of like you guys' take on what happened there at Roswell? Are we ever going to find out what actually happened, or is it just going to continue to be kind of delved into mythology, really?
I am personally of the view that everyone who honestly was there and knows firsthand what happened is dead and buried or senile, if they're even still alive. Yeah. Nick can probably do the research and tell you exactly where every member of the 509 Army Air Force Base is today, so he would speak to more authority.
Right.
I don't think anyone that really knows. I don't think the real truth will ever come out. The best we can do, Dick and I, working very independently, both put forth that man-made view that he's popular for in his book, Body Snatchers in the Desert, and that I do as a lecture, Roswell 47, What Really Happened. I don't think anyone can disprove us firsthand anymore. It's really all a matter of adding up the research and evidence that's available. What do you think about that same question, Nick?
Well, yeah, I think the problem is, the further the case goes into history, we're talking almost 70 years now, 68 years ago. So if you had a guy involved in that case who was 22 at the crash site, he'd be 90 now. That's how long ago this all is. Yeah. So, I think the problem is with something like Roswell, clearly something significant happened. Now, if the material evidence was extraterrestrial, then clearly that material would have been preserved and still, to this day, the bodies would be some sort of preservation tanks, that kind of thing. And there would be massive files. The fact that none of that has surfaced suggests that if it's true, then it's in such deep lockdown, there's no way to get it. Now, with the idea of some sort of classified military operation, using human subjects. Well, when I did my book, the one thing that all the people agreed on was that when all of this was shut down, apparently, in sort of late 47, that all the records were destroyed because they were sort of, perceived as being semi-illegal, and there was no need for them to keep the remains of wrecked gliders and huge balloons, and there was no need for them to keep the corpses of the people who were killed because they didn't learn much from the high altitude exposure experiments. So in other words, what they all told me was everything was destroyed. Now, in other words, if the human experimentation angle is the real one, then we'll never prove it because everything was shredded and destroyed way back when. And logically, you wouldn't keep the remains of, prototype rockets and gliders if they didn't work. You just scrap it. And I said, if it was semi-illegal, people protecting themselves by destroying all the files would make sense. And we do know that, even the General Accounting Office and the Air Force admitted that when they did their investigations, they found that a bunch of, a substantial amount of records from the old Roswell Army Airfield was missing from 45 through to 49. And that's never been found. Now, a lot of UFO research will say, well, it's hidden. And I think that's a lot of it is driven by the fact that they want it to be hidden because it means there's a chance of finding it. But if it isn't hidden, but it really was destroyed, then we'll never know. You know?
Yeah. Another thing I wanted
to agree entirely with you. By the way, that everything was just destroyed. They knew if it was technically illegal, it was a crime against humanity what they were doing.
Right.
And so. Just, bury everything, wash your hands of it, gentlemen. We will never speak to this again. Da 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 da.
Well, those of us in the Collins elite know. Oh, did I out myself? I'm sorry. Hey, by the way, I do have a brush with greatness with that, though. I do have a direct relationship with somebody in the aviary. Are you familiar with the aviary?
Mm-hmm.
No,
not personally.
Well,
I've read.
But you're aware of this group supposedly kept all those secrets about it. One of the guys in the aviary was a guy I worked with on a daily basis. And one day I saw him outed on Coast to Coast, his identity. He was known as Hawk in the aviary. And his real name was Ernie Kellerstrass. And he was a colonel who worked in the Foreign Technology Director, which was a place I was offered a job at Wright-Patterson when I worked there. And I worked with him daily. He was working for SRL as a contractor, and he and I worked daily. And he told me about his absolute knowledge of the UFO phenomenon and the records that he had seen in the government. And this guy was a colonel. I mean, he had really raised up there, and he had some responsibility with that, particularly when they had aerial manifestations. And I know some of the guys that he worked with sort of just raised their eyebrows at him. And for a while, I had tried to get him to come on FutureQuake, but he was so disturbed. Because I started FutureQuake after I moved from there, but he was so disturbed about some of the dark things he found from it, he was disturbed to talk about it. But his cover was blown anyway on Coast to Coast when they identified the same guy. So it sort of gave him some additional credibility.
Really?
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah, Ernie Kellerstrass was his name. Great guy, very smart person. And, I can vouch for his credentials and having worked in that other stuff. And he it sort of disclosed a lot to me long before he was outed. What's that?
Nick, we talked about the aviary a little bit with Adam Gorightly the other night, which is like the first part of this show. And Richard Doty came up in that conversation as well. What Mike is saying is true here. Have they, has the identities of those members of the aviary, have those all been revealed?
The what been revealed, sorry?
The identities of the members of the aviary?
Not as far as I know, I don't think they all have. I mean, it depends on who, for example, we know about in the first place, when these names, these bird names are applied, there may be some that, we haven't actually been told the names. I mean, the code names even. But you find a lot of groups like this, sort of think tank type groups, people get together and hold official positions, and they have, they're sort of digging into the UFO subject as well. And so, it wouldn't surprise me if there weren't sort of other kind of similar groups to the Avery and the Collins Elite and all that kind of thing. They're sort of like think tank groups with their own personal agendas and ideas on the phenomenon and what's going on and how they all interpret it. And so I think that, when you talk about the Avery, there could be, multiple kind of levels of groups like that.
One of the points that I was going to bring up was I heard a radio interview with a researcher, and I've forgotten his name, but he's done a lot of research into the Roswell crash, and one of the points that I thought that he brought up that was really valid, and this had to do with the Undertaker, Glenn Dennis, who claimed that he had the nurse that said that she saw the bodies and all this. Well, the big point in that was that Dennis did not come out with that until, I believe, into the late 80s. And that's 40 years after the fact. So how can we actually say that there, that's not exactly eyewitness testimony there,
Glenn Dennis's drawings, which are nowadays famous, they're the only thing that you have. If you have an image in your head of what the bodies were at Roswell,
right,
it's because it's based on the drawings that he didn't do. He actually recruited an artist to do for him. He said, "This is what this nurse drew for me on a cocktail napkin or some such thing, but I've lost her original drawing from 47. So you're right. It's a third-hand drawing produced decades later by someone who's half remembering or I'm going to say making up that part of the story. I don't know if Nick or Mike will disagree with me on that. I have no problems with, yes, he did get the phone calls. I don't think if he even went to the base that he could have gotten too far being a civilian, though. I think his story gets kind of embellished, self-embellished over the years is what some locals have said. It's like every time they would hear it in the late 70s or the 80s and then the 90s and then the 2000s. Oh, man, that story just keeps getting better and better with the telling.
Right.
Is one of the phrases I've heard around here. But the nurse, Naomi Self, he finally confessed was her name. Nobody's been able to find her. Like, you can track down everyone that worked there or was assigned there. But I think most of the big names in the field I shouldn't put words in the mouths of people like, Randall Schmidt, Carrie Friedman. I think they would all say that they don't believe the part about the nurse that ever existed either, though.
Right.
Because everybody has tried to find her. Agree or disagree on that, Nick?
Well, yeah, I think the big problem is that regardless of whether or not the nurse story is true, the fact that he admitted to changing the name and obfuscating the name just blows any credibility out the window. It's kind of like the boy who cried wolf. It doesn't matter if there was a nurse, but because by tainting it, by admitting, well, I didn't give you the real name the first time and then changing it again and all this, that inevitably creates doubt. And when you have doubt and you have somebody who changes their story, it doesn't matter if the story's true. It's tainted beyond repair,
Right, exactly.
Yeah, if you as a researcher have gone on the record, hard copy published a book based on someone's story that they revealed to you, so your reputation, your publisher, a lot of hard copies of a book are now on the line. And then they admit later, well, I've made this part up or this has changed. I was trying to protect whatever. But I think Adam's original point was that those drawings themselves I would therefore conclude, based on what we're talking about, is that they should be considered 100% unreliable or tossed out, because a nurse who doesn't exist drew them in front of him. Decades later, he conveniently lost that drawing. But decades later, he hires or recruits somebody else, a professional artist, to draw it based on his verbal remembrance of what she said in 47. She allegedly said in 47. So it just seems like that is completely made up and unreliable. Is what I would argue for.
And there's a lot of the story. There's a lot of the story that's based off of that too.
Yeah. The mythology, as you said,
right.
You're correct. I've referred to it as a modern mythology in one of my own ways. It's the way I put it in my book. I say I think I'm fair in rightly calling this a modern mythology nowadays.
What I do think is really interesting, though, is if you read the Air Force's crash test dummy report, the second one report they put out that just dealt with the dummies, they actually didn't dismiss Glenn Dennis's story. In fact, they went out, they provided what they felt was a rational explanation for what he'd seen, which was in relation to injured airmen and the whole crash test dummy scenario. So that was sort of really ironic that a lot of people in ufology were saying, this story is just garbage, that Dennis is telling. And the Air Force is like, no, we actually think there's something to it. And it's like injured airmen being taken to the hospital and all that kind of thing. So, in other words...
He was not the only one saying there were bodies, though, was there? He's not the only one, at least not in that point in time, the 80s. Okay, yeah. So they weren't responding only to him. I apologize for interrupting.
No, but it is kind of ironic that the Air Force, in a strange way, actually said, well, yes, Glenn Dennis did see something, but they obviously didn't say it was aliens, but they said...
Try to validate it.
They try to validate it rather than say, you're full of it or whatever.
Right, exactly.
Maybe that was just done out of like a politeness or something. I don't know, but it was kind of strange.
Look, you and I are both correct in what we posit. There were some bodies they had to explain away somehow.
Yep.
So.
Well, we're almost out of time, guys, but I want to get from both of you kind of like what's next on the plate for you guys. Starting with you, Nick, what books are coming up?
One of my big interests, you probably know, is cryptozoology, and I've got a book coming out on the Loch Ness Monster, which looks at looks at from a very different alternative angle. It deals with all the a lot of the weird paranormal stuff surrounding Loch Ness, like Aleister Crowley having a house there and UFO sightings over the loch. So, in other words, it's more of like a Fortean Keelian look at the history of the Loch Ness Monster rather than the idea of it being a biological animal.
See, I told you Aleister Crowley was going to come up sometime tonight.
Every week.
It's going to happen. It always happens on this show. and Guy, for you, what? And Mike has a question. But first of all, Guy, what's next on the plate for you? Since you've now
I think this
gone back to Roswell,
here should create we should create our own think tank, like you were talking about. We can become our own Collins Fleet aviary group somehow.
That's right.
Just the people on this call right now could probably stand the tide. My main goal is I'll be presenting a mini condensed lecture, 25 minutes or so, of the Roswell 47 that I do in that hour talk on that you've probably seen, or most of you have seen. But I think the biggest thing is to get that view out there. Here's a logical...
Yeah.
Is Nick still on?
Okay. The question I have for both y'all is about the other big UFO event, and that pertains to the Kelly Green men. Do you think that they're going to be coming back? I don't know why you're laughing over there.
This one.
I'm
unfamiliar.
Nick, are you familiar with the Kelly Green men?
Do you mean the Kelly Hopkinsville one?
Yeah, in Hopkinsville. Yeah.
Back in the 50s?
55, yeah.
I seriously doubt they're going to come back after 60 years.
Yeah. When I had heard they were having the 50th anniversary, because it's right here in this general area, and as you know, it's the only UFO report that not only had large numbers of witnesses, but it's the other one where Kentuckians actually repelled by force a UFO invasion. And when I went to the UFO data center there in Roswell, to get in advance of my interview to get some data on it, they looked at me like I was crazy. They'd never heard of it in the library, and they started researching it, and they said, oh my goodness, this is the most reported UFO event in our entire data. Having a gunfire battle with these aliens that were attacking their house. So I just wondered if you all thought that they might reappear again.
I don't know.
I have to defer to Nick because I'm not familiar with the Kelly Green man, other than that's the event you try to go to every year, right, Adam?
I think I tried to go. I wanted to go, but
we're going next
didn't
year.
happen. Well, we're going to go next year.
For Nick, that's really the missing link in his research. I think really Nick has let down the community by not really going after the one serious one. Probably as a cover-up.
There's not much you can do with a case that's 60 years ago and they vanished into the woods. What can you do about it?
Yeah, unless you're part of the cover-up. Unless it's the Redfern Axis.
Well, no, you can't do anything with it. I mean, it's kind of like saying somebody saw Bigfoot in the woods 60 years ago. Go out there and investigate it now. Well, what are you going to find apart from squirrel crap,
Well, us Kentuckians, we actually repulsed them just like the Redcoats in the Battle of New Orleans. They ran through the briars and they ran through the brambles. So, I think we need to learn from them what we need to do for the next wave that comes.
Was that a Johnny Horton reference?
Yes, Johnny Horton.
Just making sure.
All right, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being part of the 100th episode Extravaganza. We really appreciate it.
Super pleasure, man.
Thank you.
Thanks for calling us on.
Absolutely. And at some point, want to have, each of you guys on for full episodes yourself. So, and we'll get an update from Guy and Nick. I'd love to talk about any book that you write. So,
okay, cool.
Absolutely. You all gentlemen, have a very good evening.
You too, guys. See you later.
You too, friend.
We'll be back with some more people. Back, guys, for the final segment, our next to final segment of the Conspirinormal 100th episode Extravaganza, Skype Call Edition. And we have on the line Mr. Rocky Stucci. And we were supposed to have Mr. Scotty Roberts, but he is MIA, missing in action. Maybe he went back to Egypt or something. But
we know where he really is. He's getting beat up right now. Let's just bring
it Is he getting domestically abused?
Getting domestically abused.
Rocky, it is so good to talk to you, man. It's been a long time. We had you. We kind of did like a crossover episode. It was myself and Rob, and then with you, we kind of put it out as like a crossover between Conspirinormal and EBN back in. I think that was June, like beginning of June of this year, and this has been kind of a momentous year for us because we also are on your and Scotty's network now, IPBN FM. And really happy to be there. And it's been a really momentous year for you too. How are things going with your radio show? And,
well, things are going good, but before I even speak of anything, I congratulate you guys because I was having a conversation with somebody the other day and we were talking about this industry in general. And you guys see it, I see it, and all the people that are with you right now, we witness this all the time, is that people come into this business and within 3 weeks, they think they're going to be like a Rush Limbaugh or they're going to be super famous. And because they don't get the results they get right off the bat, a lot of people walk away. So it takes a lot of dedication and loyalty to what we do in this industry. And there's many times where we feel alone and we put all this work and effort into it. And we hope for the results and we hope for the listeners to follow what we have the passion in. And for you guys to make it to this point, 100th episode, that is a huge, huge feat. So hats off to you guys and much congratulations.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Amen to that.
I really think that didn't think that we were ever going to get to this point. When I first started this, 100 episodes seemed a long way off, but yet here we are. And we're going to continue going. Yep.
So anyways, about the show, EBN, I don't know. We're causing trouble. We're ruffling some feathers, but, I used to do a lot of paranormal. I used to do a lot of paranormal shows and there was something missing when I was doing the paranormal. You guys know I have this huge passion within the field. You guys know that I do a lot of work here, especially locally within the Twin Cities. But, when it comes to radio and my messages and what I wanted to present to the audience, something was missing with me. It's just a lot of people that I was talking to and then I was interviewing. It just, to me, and I say this respectfully, but it was always just another ghost story to me. And when you have this experience in the field of the paranormal, the hardest thing to sell to the audience is the emotion that is supported with the story. And I've talked with Scotty about this and many other people, is how do you sell the emotion that you experience when you actually have a true paranormal event? And that's difficult to do. So that's where I kind of made a little bit of a shift and I kind of brought my show up to current events. And when I made this shift in the current events, things just completely exploded and I got picked up by multiple networks. And I also signed a contract here with the local Twin City station talking about current events, but it's a little aggressive. It's kind of in your face, type of show, but the reality is reality. And I believe in this country and I believe in the Constitution. And I believe in which so many people have lost their life fighting for this country. And I wanted to produce that. I wanted to bring that to an audience. And that's kind of the shift that we made. And things have been absolutely phenomenal, man.
Why do you think that there was, people have kind of shifted over to that instead of like the paranormal? You think that was just like the interest just wasn't there as far as discussing the paranormal aspects and I know on our show, we try to mix things up a little bit between the two. And I think we do an okay job with it, but sometimes I wonder if, especially with like the ghost stuff, whether that stuff just gets old and how much more can you really talk about it?
Well, there has to be a point to where are you learning something, or is the audience learning something from the people you're bringing on your shows? And
right,
and I guess in the ghost hunting culture, there's only so much you can learn, and now you can become much more advanced. You got people like Micah Hanks and other people that really bring things to the table, really educational things to the table, and they go so much beyond. They talk about physics and they talk about the universe, and I was not like that. I'm very mediocre of an intellect when it comes to those things, and I interview Micah Hanks and I become dumbfounded. He starts talking and I have to start Googling the words that he's saying because I don't even understand what he's saying sometimes. But and I say that respectfully, of course.
That's really just my accent, by the way, Rocky. I'm saying potato. It's just the way I say it. Okay, potato.
But there's a passion there still, and I love the paranormal field. I love doing field work. I absolutely love it. Then again, what is research really? I mean, am I doing it to do research, or am I doing it because there's just a passion there, and I'm just trying to get a personal understanding? And there's so many different branches of that tree. When it comes to religion, when it comes to science, when it comes to the tools that we use within the field, when it comes to approach, and then you have the psychics and the mediums and the demonologists and it goes on and on and on. But I think, gentlemen, what the big kick was when I made the transfer over into the current events field is that there's a lot of people that are extremely passionate about what's happening today in our society, in our world. And a lot of people are concerned about some things that are happening. A lot of people are afraid of some of the things that are happening. And I think it's a relief that when you have somebody who's willing to come forward and speak what so many people are afraid to say, people resonate to that, because a lot of people, we've become such a politically correct society that everybody's afraid to say something without offending somebody. And it's a voice for the people. And I believe within my area, I know some people kind of think I get a little off the end, but I'm just speaking from the heart. And it's unfortunate that these days that people who feel speaking their mind is the wrong thing to do, that's kind of the society that we've become, and that's very unfortunate.
What's the biggest concern for you right now? Kind of like in this political climate. That's
my biggest concern, is the future of this country. And I'm doing a lot of research right now when it comes to, let's just say, social engineering. And I know you guys, everybody in that room right now with you, are very familiar with what I'm talking about when it comes to social engineering. But I'm also going a lot deeper. I'm doing a lot of research right now on the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm doing a lot of research on all the organizations affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. And they call it civilized jihad. We don't see civilized jihad as much as we see it in the European countries. I mean, we look at Australia right now. We look at Germany right now. We see what happened in France. That's not civilized jihad. But in the United States, because of the United States and with our Second Amendment and other rules of law that we have in this country, they call it civilized jihad, and how they had to manipulate our system and infiltrate our system from the inside out. And it is not a radical belief, and this is not a conspiracy theory. This is something that is really happening. And if we don't get control of this, and it's not so much what I'm worried about for me, it's my children and the future that my children have and their children have. And it's going to get a lot worse if we don't get a grip of what's happening right now. I'm not saying that Muslims are bad. You guys know I got many Muslim friends. I'm talking about the radical side of things and the takeover. And we see what's happening throughout the world, and it's starting to happen here. And with the whole social engineering, and you see this hatred towards police officers, and you see college teachers getting pushed out of, they're getting forced out of their colleges because these college kids are so off the wall these days that if the teachers don't believe in what they believe in, they force them out. We see 13-year-olds fighting their school teachers, and we're seeing this big societal change. And how and when did this happen, and who's behind it, and what's the motive behind it? And that's what concerns me the most.
What led you into looking into that? What was kind of like the chain of subjects that you found that kind of got you to that point?
Well, it's not so much the politics that got me into it. It's you guys, I observe things, and you guys know where I come from. I lived a tough life, but I made those choices. I put myself in these situations, and
yes,
and so I'm very good at picking out, like, let's just say, like a con artist, or you can't bullshit a bullshitter type of guy,
right.
And I'm watching this change, and I remember when I was a kid, my dad always said how things were different when he was young and how things were changing. But this is different compared to what my father referred to, and this is different compared to even what I went through as a child of what we're seeing in society today. And I do believe that media plays a big part of it. I mean, look at the people, our general society. Look at who they idolize. They idolize some of these Hollywood folks that are just the worst examples to look up to. I mean, we used to look up to pro athletes when we were kids, and now we're looking up to Justin Bieber. There's been a big shift, and
it's pretty sad.
The way these kids are, I think that's what bothers me, is that when I go to these schools and I talk to these schools about bullying, and when I go to these schools and I direct who I'm talking to more towards the teachers and the parents, because it's what we teach our kids, is how we educate our kids to be as an individual, because us as parents are the greatest teachers. And I'm seeing this huge shift in schools of violence. And, we're seeing 11-year-olds trying to commit suicide. This was unheard of back when I was young. So why are these kids these days so cruel? And why are kids at 11 years old trying to commit suicide? And that's kind of what started it, where I started looking really deep into the different changes in our society and our cultures. And then it brought me into the government and everything else that we're witnessing today, and these big corporations and banks. And it's a mess, brothers. It's a mess.
That does pretty much blow my mind that you can have children that young that would commit suicide.
11 years old, man.
There's got to be so many factors that go into that. One of them probably would be like the drugs and the psychotropic drugs that they're really not supposed to be putting kids on.
Well, and that is a big part. And I'm sure you guys have indulged into the whole the pharmaceutical, or what I call Pharmageddon. Our culture, the United States, we have the highest rates of just about every type of addiction throughout the world. And it's funny because there's countries like Egypt where you can go into a store and buy morphine over the counter.
Yeah.
But yet the morphine drug abuse rate is higher still in the United States when we have to pay for it and get it through prescription. So it is. A lot of it is drugs. A lot of these kids that I deal with and these families that I deal with, they start out by stealing their parents' prescription medications. Right away, if you're a child and you have a sore toe, well, that means you have ADHD, so we're going to put you on Ritalin, or we're going to put you on Adderall. There's always a pill now for everything, and I believe that the more pills you take, and I'm just speaking from experience now, the more pills that you take, you start actually losing your identity as a person, as a human, because we become so dependent for these pills to make us the machine that we are. And you're exactly right. I think the pharmaceutical industry has a big play in it. Media, TV, what we watch on TV is completely different, and I believe that has a big play in it. And of course, parents need to start taking more responsibility into how they're raising their children and who their children are associating with, and we need to start reestablishing respect and loyalty and kindness back to our kids.
Could I interject something here?
Sure.
On this topic, some research that I did on trying to find out how prevalent this is. If you add the numbers for the people who are on some kind of psychotropic, reality-altering drugs by prescription, and then you add those who are abusing prescription drugs that have similar effects for some reason, as well as those who abuse illegal drugs that are the hard drugs, the right. Reality-altering, the total adds up to more than 50% of the American population.
50%.
So this says the majority of people are on some artificial form of reality. And I was talking to a principal the other day, and I just asked him what was on his mind. I said, what's really been on your mind? He said, I have this incredible fear of my entire body of students that are so young, and all of them are on the edge with the potential of being violent, having a psychotic, violent event. And he said they're also being exposed to home environments that no child should ever be exposed to.
Absolutely.
And my opinion is, if this overwhelming data that keeps coming out, and I'm not saying that there's not a time and a place for pharmaceuticals for momentary times of crisis to get people through extreme grief and crisis, but for all the concern of other things in society, you mentioned like the Sharia law stuff and all this other kind of stuff. But to me, this is the elephant in the room. For all of these other concerns, they have to take a back seat to what you're talking about right now. If we have a majority of a population that can't deal with reality, and you see the comments on the even on television for these drugs that they can cause psychotic episodes. Where people flip. We don't have any kind of long-term data on the effect on people, whether they're going to need ever stronger doses to maintain help, or if they just, again, have some other negative effect. That, to me, if I was the president on down, this should be job one. Absolutely. Is what is happening to the sanity of our society.
Gentlemen, it's scary. It's scary. It is definitely scary, and I'm glad he brought that up. I mean, over 50%, that's incredible. That is absolutely incredible.
Yeah. So you're a minority if you're not using some chemical means to alter your reality.
Isn't that something?
Yeah. It really is.
And I don't mean that as a disparagement against people who need treatment and have found some relief with that. Our diet is so screwed up, the food that we're eating, that could induce all sorts of problems that have required desperate measures to fix. Of course, the real fix is with our food supply on that aspect of it. But we've had so many other factors that I have empathy for people who have been desperate for some relief. But that doesn't mean we still don't have a big problem that we all need to decide and focus our energies. It's almost like a space program. We need to put that kind of level of effort for the mental health of our entire society.
Exactly. Well, and just to kind of piggyback off what you're saying, look at our veterans. Look what our veterans are going through. 22 a day are committing suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this treatment called EMDR. I had it. It's for people with PTSD, and it's a very simple treatment, very effective treatment. Seems to work fairly quickly, and insurance companies won't cover it. They will not cover it because you don't need medications for it. It's a very simple, cost-friendly treatment. And people are dying every day, but yet we can't get this to these people because they either don't have the benefits for it or they don't have the knowledge that it even exists. So you're exactly right. We're broken. We're broken in many ways. And so this is exactly why I made this big shift, and I talked about what I talked about. And honestly, gentlemen, I think you guys are quite aware that I'm not afraid of opinions. I'm not afraid of what people think about what I discuss. If they can walk the shoes that I walked and been through what I've been through in life, then I'll respect their opinion a little bit more. But there's things that need to be addressed, and you can't be afraid to bring them up, and you can't be afraid to talk about it, because there's going to be people out there, no matter what you talk about, no matter what it is, somebody's always going to be offended. And we are an offended, happy society today.
I was talking to Micah earlier today about this whole idea of just like manufactured outrage. And it seems like so much of the time that you go on Facebook, and it seems like everybody has this hate of the week, whether it's the Cecil the Lion thing or whether it's Starbucks with the coffee cups. And it doesn't really matter what ideological position you're coming from. It's just like, so everybody's always got something to hate when you go on any kind of social media.
Mine's Conspirinormal right now.
Oh, thanks.
The hate Conspirinormal movement. It's a scapegoating movement.
What were you going to say, Micah?
Oh, well, I was just going to say I have a different name for that, and I call it the culture of perpetual offense.
Yeah.
Because people just, they stay offended rather than getting involved. Right. And I think when we have situations like what I say allegedly, because this is so ridiculous that I still wonder if it actually happened, but as reported by news, no, where was this? Was it New Jersey, I believe, last week? And Rocky, you may have seen this, in fact. There was a city councilwoman who had quit. She left her position because she was so offended that the town had decided to erect a Christmas tree. And putting up the Christmas tree was offensive because, of course, this was insensitive, the celebration of a Christian holiday. We can't do that anymore. And so she resigned from her position on city council because of this. And I'm thinking, when we're getting to a point where putting up a damn Christmas tree is offensive, this is something that we have to live by action, and I'm going to have to, with a heavy heart, resign from my post as one of the council members of this city.
What if your relative had been hung from a Christmas tree? You'd look at it different.
Well, that must have had really strong branches, I guess.
You wouldn't be singing "O Tannenbaum."
I guess my relatives would have had to have been little Christmas ornaments, little elves or balls or something like that. But I can think of another crude joke to tell here. But Rocky, man, you're hitting all the right points here, and it's true. People are more worried about expressing how offended they are by meaningless things than they are concerned with actually making progress and solving problems. And when it comes to mental health and concerns about something like mental health, I mean, again, I say that a number of the violent crimes and also the everything from shooting sprees to social issues that include homelessness and whatnot, these have to do almost in every instance with mental health issues and treatments that could probably seek to address the broader problems rather than just placating and place holding to try and get by, which is what I see more and more of these days in our society. We don't want real solutions. We just want to try and have a quick solution, a simple solution, and preferably one that requires tons of government funding to be able to do it. And we want to just try and get by and hope that we don't piss everybody off in the process. If people would stop being pissed off and that they would actually move toward common sense, effective solutions to these kind of social problems, we would actually be making more progress. But we're not making progress because people are more concerned about being pissed off than solutions. That's really how I feel.
And not doing anything about it.
And I've
well, you
offended.
have time to assign blame.
Yeah.
We don't want to waste time on solutions. We need to assign blame.
Exactly.
First.
Yeah, let's get our priorities straight. You see, I've just pissed off half the listeners just by saying that. but to that I say, people will call me a blowhard. They call every one of us that, and Rocky, you're no stranger to that too. I'm afraid because people who are willing to say, here's some numbers. Look at these statistics about violent crime. Look at these statistics about drug abuse. Look at these statistics about bullying. Look at these statistics about any number of situations that are affecting our society. People can complain and they can bitch and moan, but they really don't want solutions unless they're, and if they did, I would say they would be more inclined to get active like you're doing. And I think that like having an intelligent conversation about these issues helps facilitate it, helps move us in a goal-oriented way toward better solutions. So, Rocky, I just got to say I'm sitting back listening, and I want to commend you for being somebody who points these kind of things out and says, you know what, we do need to really look at common sense solutions. We really have to try and move more toward trying to be oriented in a way in society that is less offended all the time by everything and more concerned with really progressing.
Rocky, I want to ask you, it's something I've never asked you in the past. And when you go to schools and when you talk to kids, what is it that you tell them? What do you talk about when you talk to these people?
Well, one of the biggest things I try to point out is trying to see that, here's the thing is that when you're talking to a child, you need to speak to them in a way that a child is going to absorb what you're saying. And I'm very immature, so I'm really good at that part. Okay, that was a joke. Nobody got it. But, just like parents, when I talk to parents, I'm really in their face because it is what it is. Reality is the reality. And to a lot of people, the problem isn't a problem until it actually happens to them. But when I talk to children, and there's specific stories that I bring up. And I actually posted a video a couple weeks ago, and I was in tears by some of the messages I received from people because it's telling me how many people are dealing with this with their children in schools. And I try to get these kids to be in someone's position. Like I went to an event a few years back. The kid was in 5th grade going to 6th grade. And so you change schools, so it's a big deal. And he went up on stage and he talked about the 3 friends that were nice to him in 5 years. That's all he could remember. And he talked about it for 12 minutes were the 3 people that were actually kind to him in 3 whole years. And I was sitting right next to his dad and grandfather and try to picture what the father and the grandfather were going through while they were watching their grandson and their son up on stage talking about 3 people that were nice to him. When kids just want to go to football games, they just want to have girlfriends, they just want to be part of society, they want to be part of the friendships, they want to be on the playground playing with everybody. But they can't because of the cruelty of these children. And the cruelty of these children is learned from the behavior of the parents for most of the part. Or they learn from the people that are around the most. And so the parents have to take responsibility of the way that their children act. And it was funny because when this little child got up to walk up to the stage, everybody avoided him like he had the plague. And the funny thing is that the entire crowd started laughing. The adults thought that behavior was funny. And that's the problem. That's the problem, that the adults in that school thought that behavior that these kids were acting like was funny, treating this kid like a little piece of sand. And that's disgraceful and that's disrespectful. And at the end of this event, I went up to this little kid and I got on a knee. And I said, you taught me more in 10 minutes than any adult could teach me in a lifetime. Your courage to get up on that stage and to talk about what you talked about is more than anybody in this school could ever do at any time. So I says, I will never forget you. And, you try to present this to these kids. You try to present to these kids, what if you were sitting in the lunchroom by yourself every day for 5 years? What if you wanted to go to birthday parties, but nobody ever invited you? You got to try to make them feel that emotion and that pain that these kids go through just to get these kids to be kind. And that's the saddest part, gentlemen.
Yeah.
I was blessed to have a mother and even my father, but who really drilled that in my head to go talk to the kid that nobody was talking to, or child with a disability or something else. And I realize that's the norm. But what I'm wondering is the advent of the antisocial culture of young people today because of the obsession with video games.
Right.
And not interacting socially, but more one-on-one just through the video console or remotely through, Facebook or whatever else they use. It seems like to me this is going to make it much, much worse. And they're becoming much more socially awkward. Definitely the bullying and stuff like that, that's gone on for a long, long time. It even goes up through college. Look at the fraternities and sororities and the superficiality they promote. But now it's gotten even worse because they don't even see people face to face. And the things that are said on Facebook and elsewhere are things that would have never been said in a civil society or when people within earshot. So it looks like to me you're going to have to address the internet culture if you're going to have any progress in this.
The internet culture is a huge task because you're exactly right. Because these days people don't know how to have friends unless it's through a private message. People don't know how to have friends unless they're playing somebody they don't know from another country on an Xbox game.
Yeah.
We have lost the art of communication. We have lost the art of speaking to people face to face. And adults are just as much as guilty. I know a couple that don't talk to each other when they're in person, but they private message each other all the time when they're not with one another. That's a huge point that you bring up because it's only getting worse. And let me bring this up. Look at the games these kids are playing. They are the most violent games. They are disgusting. There's people being raped, shot, murdered, killing cops. What are we breeding into our children? Are we desensitizing them? What are we doing to them to allow them to play these types of, it is disgusting. And, for an adult, it's even kind of awkward. But for an 11-year-old, 12-year-old, 13-year-old to be playing a game thinking it's okay to shoot a cop, that's a problem. And that's going to create some kind of an issue as they grow older. Look at the hatred people have for police officers today. And I say to those people, get an education to go out and try to be a police officer yourself before you judge what a police officer goes through every day on the streets. There's some kind of a desensitizing that's happening today. And it's extremely, extremely disturbing.
Yeah, it really is. It makes me wonder just how some of the kids that are coming up now, how they're going to be, 10, 20 years ago. But at the same time, I look back and I think every generation kind of says that at a certain point, but not every generation has had the amount of, social media and technology, the explosion that we have had in the last, 10, 15 years.
I tell you what's new, Adam, is that now it is new that people communicate with a handful of words and a handful of characters. What used to be very complex thoughts and very deep, lengthy conversations. Right. Now everything is answered in just a handful of words. That is the depth of thinking now that has been cultivated on very difficult issues. And that, to me, that's 1984 has been successful now because the willingness to reassess our language, to repackage it in its most simplest base terms has been accomplished through technology.
Yeah.
How can you keep more than a 2-minute attention span with, I'm not saying all, but the majority of, I won't even say younger people. I'll say 30-somethings and down these days. You can't hardly buy more than 2 or 3 minutes of their time. And ask about reading a book, it better be pretty exciting every 5 pages. Or if you're going to watch a movie, there better be a robot stomping on a building every couple minutes.
Because robots are cool.
Yeah, they're worthy of our time.
And maybe you could have balls too. You could have that in there too. So
have what?
You could have balls, like in the second Transformers movie where one of them had balls.
What?
Ridiculous.
I wasn't even looking.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. Rocky, we're almost out of time here, but real quick, what's been your favorite guests so far that you've had on the show? The ones that you've been doing recently with the special report.
For recently, I'm going to have to say that you guys know who Scott Bennett is.
Yeah.
I like Scott Bennett a lot because this guy he's psychological operations. He comes from it. He knows exactly what's happening, and he's going against most of what he was taught to say publicly. He's going against that because he sees what's happening. He's not afraid to crawl in the rabbit hole. He's not afraid to call a spade a spade. And he's very intelligent. And I very much enjoy him coming on the show and sharing his information because he he helps open up people's eyes to the reality, because the only thing most people see is what they see on mainstream media, and what's on mainstream media is exactly what they want you to know. You got somebody like Scott who has resources throughout the world that shares information and kind of lightens us on the reality and the cruelty that is happening throughout the world. And the unfortunate part is that a lot of blood is unfortunately on our government's hands, and that's the saddest part of it all. That's the part where I got to pinch myself and say this can't be real.
Yeah, very interesting guest, but we would have loved to have talked to him longer, but our system completely melted down. It's the most odd thing that has ever happened on this show.
Right.
So
Big Brother said no.
Yeah,
said no.
Exactly. Yeah. That's how we really feel about it too. I mean, it could have been a fluke, but it was extremely strange.
I know we're running down, but really quick story is that the last week, Scotty got a hold of me. He wanted some information in regards to his show. So it was last Monday. I go up on my computer here. I was going to pull up all my software for our streamer, and it said the account was canceled. It was terminated. So I got a hold of my server company, and I'm like, well, what the hell's going on? Why is this terminated? I didn't terminate nothing, right? And they says, yeah, somebody went right in through your host page or your owner page, and they canceled the account. I'm like, oh. So I go up and tell my wife, and she goes, see, that's what you get when you call Obama a cockroach. Sooner or later, somebody's going to come and get you. So she thought it was because I called Obama a cockroach, and he is a cockroach, but that's just the way I feel about it.
Do you mean that in a nice way, or?
That was about as nice as I can get when I start talking about him.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Rocky, and thank you also for your support this year. And
you guys doing amazing work. You guys keep doing what you're doing. You guys are a great show. You guys are fun to listen to. You bring good hard topics to the table, and I say hats off to you guys, and I look forward to being a guest on your 200th episode, gentlemen.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks,
and I'm sure if Luke were here, I'm sure he'd have some off-color comment for you.
I miss that guy.
So do we.
Yeah, we do too.
Thanks, guys. Congratulations again.
You too. Thank you.
To all my friends, present, past, and beyond, especially those who weren't with us too long. Life is the most precious thing you can lose. While you were here, the fun was never ending. Life a minute was only beginning. Captain Coleman Nichols, this one's for you. Get that feeling you can go on. Just remember inside it is a cheer on. You've got friends with you till the end. If you're ever in a tough situation, we'll be there, no hesitation. Brotherhood's our rule, we cannot bend. To the bottom, you know who it is you can count on. Someone will pick you up again. We can conquer anything together. All of us are bonded forever. If I die, you die, that's the way it is. Present, past, and beyond. To all those who weren't with us too long, life's the most precious thing that you can lose. While you were here, fun was never ending. Last a minute was only the beginning. Get on, Coleman!